This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I've never told this story to anyone outside my family. Even now, typing this out, my hands are trembling a bit. I guess I need to get this off my chest after all these years. Back in '99, when I was 14, I inherited my great-grandfather's horse farm in Shadow Creek. It's this tiny woodland community that's basically off the map, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone else's business going back generations. The property was massive, about 80 acres of thick forest surrounding what used to be pasture land, with an old farmhouse that had definitely seen better days. By the time I got it, the place was pretty much abandoned. The horses were long gone. The barn was sagging. The only things my great-grandfather seemed to care about preserving were his collection of vintage Chevrolets, all covered with these heavy-duty tarps and parked in neat rows behind the house. He loved those cars more than anything. I should mention that I had a history of seeing things. Nothing that ever got me medicated or anything, but my parents had taken me to doctors a few times when I was younger because I'd describe people or events that weren't real. I grew out of most of it, but every now and then I'd see something that wasn't there. My family knew about it, but we never really talked about it. So anyway, it was early October, and my cousins Jake and Mitch were visiting for the weekend. They were both older than me. Jake was 16 and Mitch was 17, but they always treated me like I was part of their crew, not just some kid tagging along. We decided to explore the woods on the property since there wasn't much else to do out there, no internet, spotty cell service at best. It was cold that morning. I remember seeing my breath fog in front of my face as we stepped into the tree line behind the old barn. The leaves were just starting to turn, creating this canopy of reds and golds above us, beautiful but also eerie somehow. About a half-mile in, we came across something that stopped me in my tracks. It was a massive oak tree with a hunting stand attached to it. Now, I'd been hunting with my dad and great-grandfather in these woods before. I'd actually shot my first buck from that very stand 2 years earlier, but something was wrong. The stand wasn't where it was supposed to be. "Isn't that your grandpa's old stand?" Jake asked, looking up at it. I nodded, but I couldn't explain the feeling of wrongness that washed over me. The stand had been on the north side of the property, overlooking a small clearing where deer would gather at dawn. This was the east side, and there was no clearing, just dense woods in all directions. No hunter would put a stand here. You couldn't see more than 20 feet in any direction. "Did someone move it?" Mitch asked, walking around the tree. "That thing weighs a ton," I said. "It would take at least 3 people to move it, and why would anyone bother bringing it all the way out here?" We examined it for a while. The bolts were securely fastened into the tree, and they looked rusted, like they'd been there for years. But I absolutely knew, this stand hadn't been here before. We continued our exploration, trying to shake off the weird feeling. For about an hour, we just hiked through the woods, following old trails that were starting to disappear under years of fallen leaves. We found an old creek bed, completely dry now, and followed it for a while. That's when I heard it, a door, opening and then slamming shut with a distinctive bang that echoed through the trees. We all froze. "What was that?" Jake whispered. I knew exactly what it was. About a quarter-mile ahead was an old cabin, really more of a shack, that my great-great-grandfather had built for woodcutting and butchering game. My uncle had shown it to me once when I was little, and he'd been dead serious when he warned me. "If you ever hear noises coming from that cabin, you turn around and get the hell out of these woods, or someone's gonna hand you your heart." I never knew if he meant that literally, or if it was just one of those weird warnings adults give kids to keep them away from dangerous places. But the memory of his face when he said it, how pale he got, had stuck with me. "It's just the old cabin," I said, trying to sound casual. "Probably an animal knocked something over." "A door?" Mitch raised an eyebrow. "That was a door, Brandon," I shrugged. "Wind, maybe." There's no wind today, Jake said, looking around nervously. Let's head back. I should have listened. I really should have. But I was 14, and there's something about being 14 that makes you think you're invincible. Plus, I didn't want my older cousins to think I was scared. Let's just check it out, I said. It's probably nothing. Mitch shook his head. I don't like this, man. This place gives me the creeps. Fine, I said. You guys head back. I'll catch up in a few minutes. They exchanged a look, and I could tell they were torn between not wanting to seem scared and genuinely feeling uneasy. 5 minutes, Jake said finally. If you're not back at the tree line in 5 minutes, we're coming to find you. I nodded, and they turned back, walking quickly. I watched them go, and for a moment I almost called out for them to wait for me, but my pride wouldn't let me. I turned and headed toward the cabin. The woods seemed to get darker the closer I got, even though it was only early afternoon. The trees grew more densely packed, blocking out much of the sunlight. The ground was softer here, the fallen leaves thicker and wetter. When I finally reached the small clearing where the cabin stood, I stopped and stared. It was exactly as I remembered it. A small, crude structure made of rough-hewn logs with a slanted roof that had probably once been covered with tar paper but was now mostly exposed wood. The single window was boarded up, and the door hung slightly ajar. As I stood there trying to work up the courage to approach, I heard something that made my blood run cold. A woman crying. The sound was coming from inside the cabin. Soft, desperate sobs that occasionally rose in pitch before falling back to a whimper. It was the most heartbreaking sound I'd ever heard. "Hello?" I called out, my voice cracking. "Is someone there? Are you okay?" The crying stopped abruptly. For a long moment, there was complete silence. Then, very quietly, I heard a woman's voice. "Help me." I should have run. Everything in my body was screaming at me to turn around and sprint back to the safety of the farmhouse. But someone was in trouble. What if she was hurt? What if she was lost? I approached the cabin slowly, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. When I reached the door, I hesitated, then pushed it open wider with my foot. The smell hit me first, a mixture of damp earth, old wood, and something metallic that I later realized was blood. The interior was dark, with just enough light filtering through cracks in the walls to see a small single room with a dirt floor. Against the far wall was a crude wooden table, and sitting at it, with her back to me, was a woman. She was wearing what looked like an old-fashioned dress, dark in color, with her hair falling loose down her back. She was hunched over, her shoulders shaking slightly. "Mom," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" She turned slowly, and I gasped. Her face was pale, almost gray, with dark circles under her eyes. But what shocked me most was the knife clutched in her right hand and the dark stain spreading across the front of her dress. "He's coming back," she whispered, her eyes wide and unfocused. "He always comes back." I stumbled backward, hitting the doorframe. "I'll get help," I managed to say. Just stay here." A strange, sad smile crossed her face. "No one can help me now." I turned to run, but something made me look back one more time. The woman was gone, not just gone from the chair, completely gone. The cabin was empty, but that wasn't the strangest part. The cabin, which from the outside had looked abandoned and decrepit, was clean inside. The dirt floor was swept smooth. The table was free of dust. Even the single chair showed no signs of age or decay. It looked like someone had been maintaining it all these years. I backed out of the doorway and then turned and ran. I ran faster than I'd ever run before, branches whipping at my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. I didn't slow down until I reached the tree line where Jake and Mitch were waiting, looking worried. "Dude, what happened?" Jake asked, grabbing my arm as I doubled over, trying to catch my breath. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Did you hear it?" I gasped. "The woman crying?" They exchanged a confused look. "We didn't hear any woman," Mitch said. "But we did hear that door slam again after you left." That's what scared me the most. They had heard the door. That meant at least part of what I experienced wasn't in my head. It wasn't one of my hallucinations. Something had happened in those woods, in that cabin. We made our way back to the farmhouse in silence. I didn't tell them about the woman I'd seen, partly because I was still processing it myself, and partly because I was afraid they wouldn't believe me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing her face, hearing her voice. He's coming back. He always comes back. The next morning, I asked my dad about the cabin. He shrugged and said it had been abandoned for decades, ever since his grandfather's time. When I pressed him about any stories associated with it, he got this strange look on his face. "Why are you asking about that old place?" he asked, his voice unusually serious. "Just curious," I lied. "We were exploring yesterday and came across it." He stared at me for a long moment, then said, "Some places are better left alone, Brandon. That's all I'm going to say about it." I never went back to that cabin. We sold the property a few years later, after my parents divorced, and neither of them wanted to maintain it. I've often wondered if the new owners ever experienced anything strange in those woods. To this day, I don't know what I saw in that cabin. Was it a ghost, a hallucination, some kind of time slip? All I know is that the fear I felt was real, and the woman's voice still haunts my dreams sometimes. He's coming back. He always comes back, and sometimes, in those dreams, I'm the one she's waiting for. Story 2. I've been trying to make sense of what happened to my family since 2009, and I still can't wrap my head around it. Maybe writing it down will help me process everything. I'm still shaken up about it, and sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night wondering if it was all just a horrible nightmare, but it wasn't. It was all too real. We moved to Schwartz Creek back in 2004. There were 7 of us. My dad Ronald, Mom Charlotte, my sisters Shirira, we called her Shira, and Chelsea, my brothers Ronnie and Dylan, and me, Sabrina. The house wasn't anything special, just a normal suburban home with enough rooms for all of us kids to share. We were happy there at first. Everything was normal until 2007 when Dad started looking off. His skin had this yellowish tint to it, and the whites of his eyes were turning yellow too. Mom kept telling him to see a doctor, but Dad was stubborn. "It's probably just some virus," he'd say, brushing it off. But it didn't go away. It got worse. I remember sitting with Mom at the kitchen table one night after everyone else had gone to bed. She was on the computer researching Dad's symptoms, and I'll never forget the look on her face when she turned to me. "Sabrina," she whispered, "I think your father might have cancer." Her voice cracked, and I felt my stomach drop. When Dad finally went to the doctor, our worst fears were confirmed: aggressive pancreatic liver cancer. The prognosis wasn't good. We were all devastated, but we tried to stay strong for him. Dad was always the backbone of our family, the one who made us laugh even when things were tough. Then, just when we thought things couldn't get worse, Shira started feeling sick. She was 17 at the time, athletic, always full of energy. But suddenly she was tired all the time, had these weird lumps on her neck, and was losing weight without trying. Mom took her to the doctor, and after a bunch of tests, we got the second bombshell: Hodgkin's lymphoma. I remember sitting in our living room when Mom told us. The silence was deafening. 2 cancer diagnoses in our family within months of each other. It felt like the universe was playing some sick joke on us. Dad made a promise to Shira after her diagnosis. He told her, "I'm not going anywhere until you're better." And somehow, despite how sick he was getting, he kept that promise. Shira went through chemo and radiation. It was brutal watching her suffer through the treatments. Her beautiful long hair fell out, and she became so thin and frail. But she fought hard, and eventually the doctors told us she was in remission. Dad looked so relieved that day, like he could finally let go, and he did. Dad passed away on March 27th, 2009. It was like his body had been holding on just for Shira. The day of his funeral was surreal. I kept expecting him to walk in and tell us all it was just a big misunderstanding, but he was gone. After Dad died, our family started to fall apart. Chelsea couldn't handle being in the house anymore, so she moved to Washington to live with our Uncle James. I don't blame her. The house felt empty without Dad's booming laugh and his terrible dad jokes. About 6 months after Dad passed, Shira was home alone one night. The rest of us had gone to a movie, but she wasn't feeling well, so she stayed behind. When we got back, she was sitting on the porch, shaking, her face pale as a ghost. Later that night, Chelsea called me from Washington. "Sabrina, Shira just called me freaking out. She said she saw Dad in the kitchen." "What do you mean she saw Dad?" I asked, feeling goosebumps rise on my arms. "She said he was standing by the sink with his head down, and he was crying. She tried to talk to him, but when she blinked, he was gone." I tried to rationalize it. "She's probably just stressed and grieving," I said, but Chelsea wasn't convinced. "Sabrina, she thinks it was a warning." 2 weeks later, Shira collapsed at home. Mom rushed her to the hospital and the news was devastating. Her cancer was back, and this time it had spread throughout her body. It happened so fast, like her body just gave up fighting. I spent as much time as I could at the hospital with her. Shira had a breathing tube, so she couldn't talk, but she communicated using her phone. One evening, I was sitting with her when Ronnie came in. Shira suddenly got really agitated, pointing to the corner of the room. She grabbed her phone and typed out a message to Ronnie. "Heaven and God are real. Dad and Grandpa are here." Ronnie's face went white. "What do they want?" he asked shakily. Shira pointed to herself. We all knew what that meant, but none of us wanted to believe it. She died less than 24 hours later, on September 20th, 2009. She was only 19 years old. The night Shira died, Chelsea was in Washington, packing to fly back to Michigan. She'd been checking her phone constantly for updates on Shira's condition, and eventually exhaustion took over and she fell asleep for about an hour. When Ronnie called to tell her Shira had passed, Chelsea's response chilled me to the bone. "I know," she said calmly. "Dad and Jennifer told me." Jennifer was Dad's cousin who had died from a heroin overdose 2 months before Dad passed. Chelsea later explained that she'd had a dream where Dad and Jennifer came to her and said, "Shira's with us now." She woke up moments before Ronnie's call. I tried to tell myself it was just a coincidence, that Chelsea had been expecting the worst and her subconscious had created the dream. But deep down, I wasn't convinced. The months after Shira died were a blur of grief. Mom was barely functioning, and the rest of us were just going through the motions of living. The house felt heavy with sadness, like grief was a physical presence weighing us down. Then came January 10th, 2010. Mom had taken Dylan and our cousin Taylor sledding for the afternoon. Chelsea and I were exhausted from not sleeping well for months, so we crashed in Mom's bed while they were out. I don't know how long we'd been asleep when Chelsea suddenly shook me awake. "Sabrina, wake up! The house is on fire!" At first I thought I was dreaming, but then I smelled the smoke and heard the crackling. When I opened my eyes, I could barely see through the thick black smoke filling the room. "We need to get out," Chelsea screamed, pulling me out of bed. The smoke was so thick I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. We dropped to our hands and knees, trying to crawl toward the door. The heat was intense, pressing against my skin like a physical force. I could hear the fire roaring, consuming our home. We managed to find the bedroom door, and Chelsea reached up to open it. She screamed in pain. I found out later she suffered third-degree burns on her hands from touching the doorknob. Somehow we made it down the stairs and out the front door. We collapsed on the front lawn, coughing and gasping for air. I looked back at our house, now fully engulfed in flames, and realized how close we'd come to dying. The fire department arrived, and then Mom pulled up with Dylan and Taylor. I'll never forget the look of horror on her face when she saw what was happening. "Where's Chelsea? Where's Sabrina?" she screamed, running toward the house. When she saw us sitting on the grass, she broke down in tears. At the hospital, the doctor told us we'd had maybe 30 seconds left before the smoke would have killed us. "You girls are incredibly lucky," he said. "Someone was watching over you." Chelsea looked at me with wide eyes. "Someone called my name," she whispered. "That's what woke me up. I heard someone call my name clear as day." "Who?" I asked, though I think I already knew the answer. There was no one else in the house, Sabrina. The fire was officially ruled electrical, but I've always wondered if there was more to it. First Dad's appearance to Shira before her cancer returned, then Chelsea's dream the night Shira died, and now a mysterious voice waking Chelsea just in time to save us from the fire. Sometimes I wonder if Dad and Shira were watching over us that day, if they somehow knew we were in danger and intervened. The rational part of me says it's all just coincidence and the brain's way of coping with trauma and grief. But then I remember Shira pointing to the corner of her hospital room, typing that Dad and Grandpa were there. We lost everything in that fire, all our photos of Dad and Shira, all our memories, but maybe that was the point. Maybe it was time for us to start fresh, to stop living in a house filled with ghosts and grief. It's been years now, and I still don't have answers. I don't know if I ever will. All I know is that something happened to my family that I can't explain. Something that still keeps me up at night, wondering about the thin line between life and death, and whether those we've lost can still reach out to us from wherever they've gone. I've never told this story to anyone outside my family before. Even now, typing it out, my hands are shaking. But I needed to share it, to put it into words, to see if anyone else has experienced anything similar. Because sometimes I feel like I'm going crazy, like I imagined it all, but I didn't. It happened, and I still don't know what to make of it. Story 3. I never believed in curses or hexes or any of that supernatural stuff. I was always the rational one in my friend group, the one who'd roll my eyes whenever someone talked about Mercury retrograde or bad energy. But after what happened to me 3 months ago, I don't know what to believe anymore. It started with this weird-ass dream I had on a Tuesday night. I remember it was a Tuesday because I had been stressing about a presentation at work the next day, so I went to bed early, hoping to be well rested. Instead, I had possibly the strangest dream of my life. In the dream, I was romantically involved with this older Muslim woman who wore a blue hijab. She must have been in her 60s, at least 30 years older than me, but in the dream, it felt completely normal. We were sitting together at some lecture about Rosicrucianism, which is weird because I don't know shit about Rosicrucianism in real life. I couldn't even tell you what it is. The lecture hall was packed, and suddenly Justin Bieber of all people stumbled in, clearly drunk off his ass. He kept trying to sit next to me, putting his arm around me and slurring his words. I was trying to be polite, but also trying to get away from him. The woman in the blue hijab just kept watching, not saying anything. I finally managed to slip away from Bieber and found myself in this hallway with 3 doors. Each door had a different religious symbol on it: a cross, a crescent moon, and a Star of David. I don't know why, but I chose the door with the Star of David. When I opened it, my dad was inside a small room, packing a suitcase, except it wasn't really my dad. It looked like him, but something was off. He was smiling way too much, like unnaturally happy. My actual dad is pretty reserved, rarely shows emotion. This version of him was bouncing around the room, humming to himself. I remember asking him where he was going, and he just smiled wider and kept packing. Then I noticed a door at the back of the room that led to what looked like a gift shop. When I walked in, this ancient-looking man with yellowed eyes was standing behind the counter. He immediately pulled out this black crystal necklace and tried to sell it to me. The crystal looked like it had tiny specks of blood trapped inside it. The old man kept insisting I needed it, that it was made specifically for me. I woke up feeling completely unsettled. The dream was so vivid, I could still see that black crystal when I closed my eyes. I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled in my stomach. Later that day, I met my friend Mia for coffee and told her about the dream, thinking she'd find it as bizarre and random as I did. But instead of laughing, her face went serious. "Oliver, that sounds like a hex," she said, leaning forward. I snorted. "A what?" "A hex. A curse. Someone's put a spell on you." I rolled my eyes. "Come on, Mia. It was just a weird dream." She shook her head. "No, listen to me. In dream interpretation, when someone tries to sell you something, especially something dark or strange, it's a sign that someone is trying to influence you spiritually. They're trying to make you take on their energy." I sipped my coffee, trying not to show how uncomfortable her words made me feel. That's ridiculous. Have you pissed anyone off lately? Anyone who might have those kinds of abilities? That's when two names popped into my head. I hadn't thought about either of them in months, but suddenly they were all I could think about. The first was Eliza. We'd been friends for about a year before things went south. She was heavily into what she called the craft. Black magic, spells, all that stuff. I never took it seriously, thought it was just a phase she was going through. But the last time I saw her, after a falling out over something stupid I can't even remember now, she'd looked me dead in the eyes and said, "If you ever betray me, I'll curse you so badly you won't recognize your own life." I'd laughed it off at the time. The second person was my ex, Ren. We'd dated for 6 months, and things had gotten intense quickly. Ren was into Satanism, not the edgy atheist kind, but the actual ritual performing kind. Toward the end of our relationship, they'd asked me for a lock of my hair and a drop of my blood for a binding ritual. When I refused, they got angry, accusing me of not trusting them. We broke up a week later. I told Mia about both of them, trying to keep my voice steady. She looked even more concerned. "Oliver, this is serious. Both of these people have the knowledge to put a hex on you, and both have reason to. The dream is just the beginning. You need to cleanse yourself spiritually before things get worse." I laughed it off, told her she was being dramatic. But walking home from the coffee shop, I couldn't stop thinking about Eliza and Ren, about the dream, about that black crystal with the specks of blood. I went to work the next day trying to put it all out of my mind. I work at this bookstore downtown, nothing fancy, but I've been there for years and generally enjoy it. The morning was normal enough, shelving returns, helping customers find books, the usual. Around noon, this older woman came in looking for a specific cookbook. As I was helping her locate it, she suddenly stopped and stared at me. "You sound exactly like him," she said, her eyes wide. "Like who?" I asked, uncomfortable under her gaze. "My friend Thomas. He passed away 5 years ago, but you sound identical to him. It's uncanny." I didn't know what to say, so I just mumbled something about coincidences. But then she said something that made my blood run cold. "Are you one of those detransitioners? You have that look about you." I am a detransitioner, but I don't talk about it at work. There's no way this stranger could have known that. I've been living as male again for 3 years now, and I pass completely. I felt like she was looking through me, seeing parts of me no stranger should be able to see. I made some excuse and hurried away, but my hands were shaking so badly I dropped the book I was holding. Later that same day, I was restocking the philosophy section when I noticed this guy watching me from the end of the aisle. He was tall, wearing all black, with these intense eyes that seemed to follow my every move. I tried to ignore him, but every time I glanced up, he was still there, just staring. Finally, I gathered my courage and asked if he needed help finding anything. Without breaking eye contact, he slowly raised his hand to his mouth and licked it, from his palm all the way up to his fingertips. He didn't say a word, just stared at me while licking his hand. I froze, completely freaked out. When my coworker walked by, I quickly called her over, and when I looked back, the man was gone. By the time I got home that night, I was a wreck. 2 bizarre encounters in one day, right after that dream and Mia's warning. It couldn't be coincidence. I tried calling Mia, but she didn't pick up. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that man licking his hand, or the old woman staring through me, or the black crystal with specks of blood. Around 3 in the morning, I heard scratching at my bedroom window. My apartment is on the 4th floor, so there's no way anyone could be at my window. But the scratching continued, getting louder and more frantic. I pulled the covers over my head like a child, too terrified to look. The scratching stopped after what felt like hours, replaced by a low humming sound that seemed to come from inside my own head. The next day was Thursday, and things only got worse. I found a dead bird on my doorstep when I left for work. Its neck was twisted at an impossible angle, and its eyes were missing. I nearly threw up at the sight of it. I told myself it was probably just a neighborhood cat, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was meant for me. At work, 3 different customers called me by the wrong name, all calling me Thomas, the name of the dead friend the woman had mentioned the day before. I've never gone by Thomas. My name tag clearly says Oliver. When I corrected the third person, he looked confused and insisted that I had introduced myself as Thomas when he walked in. During my lunch break, I went to the bathroom and nearly screamed when I looked in the mirror. For a split second, I swear I saw someone else's face looking back at me. An older man with deep wrinkles and yellowed eyes, like the man from my dream who tried to sell me the crystal. I splashed water on my face, trying to calm down. When I looked up again, it was just me in the mirror, but my reflection seemed slightly off, like there was a delay between my movements and the reflections. By the time I got home that evening, I was convinced that Mia was right. I was hexed, cursed, whatever you want to call it. Either Eliza or Ren had done something to me, and now I was trapped in some kind of supernatural nightmare. I tried researching how to break curses online, but every website said something different. Some said I needed to burn sage, others said I needed to take a bath with specific herbs, others said I needed to find the source of the curse and confront them directly. I was so desperate I tried calling Eliza, but her number was disconnected. I couldn't bring myself to contact Ren. The thought of talking to them again made me feel physically ill. Around midnight, I finally fell into an exhausted sleep. That's when things went from bad to worse. I woke up, or thought I woke up, to find someone sitting at the foot of my bed. It was the woman in the blue hijab from my dream, but her back was to me. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. Sleep paralysis, I told myself. It's just sleep paralysis. But then she slowly turned her head, a full 180 degrees, her body still facing away from me. Her face was completely blank. No eyes, no nose, no mouth, just smooth skin stretched over a skull. I tried to scream, but couldn't make a sound. She reached into her robe and pulled out the black crystal necklace from my dream. As she held it up, I could see the specks inside weren't blood, but tiny writhing insects. She began to move toward me, the crystal swinging like a pendulum. I managed to break free of the paralysis and fell out of bed, scrambling backward until I hit the wall. When I looked up, she was gone. But the room felt different, colder, with a strange smell like burning hair. I turned on every light in the apartment and sat in the living room, too afraid to go back to my bedroom. Around 3 in the morning, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Ren's name, even though I'd deleted their number years ago. My hand shaking, I answered. "Do you like my gift?" Ren's voice asked, sounding distorted and distant. "What gift?" I whispered. "The clarity. The vision. I've opened your eyes, Oliver. Now you can see what's always been there." The line went dead. I tried calling back, but an automated voice said the number was not in service. Just as I was putting the phone down, I heard a knock at my door. 3 soft knocks, then silence. I held my breath, praying whoever it was would go away. Then 3 more knocks, slightly louder. Against all logic and self-preservation, I found myself walking to the door. Something was compelling me to open it, a force I couldn't resist. I reached for the doorknob. Through the peephole, I saw the man from the bookstore, the one who had licked his hand. He was smiling now, a wide, unnatural smile that stretched too far across his face. And behind him stood Eliza, her eyes completely black, and Ren holding the black crystal necklace. I stumbled backward, away from the door. The knocking stopped, replaced by the sound of something scratching at the wood. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Then a voice, not Eliza's or Ren's, but the old man from my dream. "Let us in, Oliver. We have something for you." I ran to my bedroom and barricaded the door with my dresser. The scratching followed me. Now at my bedroom window again, I could hear whispering, too many voices to count, all saying my name over and over. I huddled in the corner, covering my ears, until dawn broke. When the first light of the sun came through my window, the scratching and whispering finally stopped. I called in sick to work and spent the day researching protection spells and cleansing rituals. I went to a New Age shop and bought sage, salt, and protective crystals, following the instructions I found online to cleanse my apartment. I even found a psychic who claimed to be able to remove curses, though she wanted $300 for the service. It's been 3 months since that night. The intense manifestations have stopped. No more people at my door, no more scratching at my windows, but I still don't feel right. Sometimes I catch my reflection moving a split second too late. Sometimes I hear whispers when I'm alone, and I keep having dreams about that black crystal necklace. I've tried contacting both Eliza and Ren through mutual friends, but no one seems to know where they are. One person told me Eliza moved to another country. Another said Ren was in some kind of institution. I don't know what to believe anymore. All I know is that something happened to me that night, something I can't explain. And I'm afraid it's not over. Whatever they did to me, whatever hex they placed on me, I think it's still working. Slowly, gradually changing me into something else. Sometimes I wake up with words on my tongue I've never heard before, in languages I don't speak. Sometimes I find myself standing in rooms with no memory of how I got there, and sometimes in the mirror, just for a flash, I see someone else looking back at me, someone with yellowed eyes and a wide, unnatural smile. Story 4. I still can't explain what happened that night in 1987. It's been over 35 years, and the memory hasn't faded one bit. I've never been the type to believe in ghosts or anything supernatural, but what I experienced while babysitting that evening has stayed with me all these years. We moved to Millfield when I was 7, back in 1979. It was a quiet neighborhood with rows of semi-detached houses, all practically identical except for the different colored doors and garden ornaments. Our neighbor Jack lived in the house attached to ours, but for the first few months we barely saw him. My parents would occasionally mention the man next door, wondering why he kept to himself so much. Jack was in his 50s, tall and lean with weathered hands and a permanent 5 o'clock shadow. He worked for British Rail as some sort of engineer, and my dad said he'd been there since he was a teenager. The first time we properly met him was during autumn when my dad was having a bonfire in our back garden. Jack appeared at the fence, seemingly drawn by the crackling flames, and introduced himself with a gruff hello. That night changed everything. My parents invited him over for tea, and within weeks, Jack became like an honorary uncle to me. He was quiet but kind, with eyes that lit up whenever he talked about steam engines or mechanical things. His house was spotless but functional, nothing fancy, just practical furniture and walls covered with technical drawings and old railway photographs. The most impressive part of Jack's house was his workshop in the back garden. It was larger than most garden sheds, more like a small barn, with windows that glowed with warm light on winter evenings. Inside was an incredible collection of tools, half-finished projects, and most impressively, a coal-fueled steam boiler he'd built himself. It wasn't huge, about the size of a washing machine, but it powered various contraptions in his workshop through an ingenious system of belts and pulleys. It's all about precision, he'd tell me, tapping his temple with an oil-stained finger, every part working together just so. I'd spend hours watching him work, fascinated by how his rough hands could create such delicate mechanisms. He taught me how to use basic tools, how to respect machinery, and the importance of patience. My parents were thrilled. Jack was the perfect neighbor and a positive influence on me. For nearly 4 years, life continued like this. Jack would join us for Sunday roasts, help my dad with home repairs, and occasionally take me to railway museums. He never married and had no children of his own, so I think he enjoyed having someone to pass his knowledge on to. Then came that awful night in 1984. It was February, and one of the worst storms I can remember hit our area. The wind howled so loudly, it sounded like the house might tear apart. Rain lashed against the windows, and thunder crashed overhead every few minutes. My parents and I were huddled in the living room watching TV with the volume turned up to hear over the storm. We had no idea that next door, Jack was dying. The next morning, my mom went to put the bins out and found him. Jack was lying on the small patch of pavement between our houses, already cold. He was wearing his pajamas and dressing gown. one hand outstretched toward our front door. The paramedics said he'd suffered a massive heart attack. What haunted my parents for years afterward was learning from the police that there were scratch marks on the wall between our houses. Jack had been banging, trying to get our attention, but the storm had been too loud. He'd managed to get outside but collapsed before reaching our door. The thought that he died alone, just meters away while we sat watching TV, was devastating to all of us. Jack's house stood empty for months. Eventually, his few relatives came to clear out his belongings. They didn't know what to do with his workshop, so my dad helped them sort through it. They let me keep a few small items, a brass compass, some technical drawings he'd made, and a small wooden metronome he used to keep on his workbench. Jack had told me once that he liked to work to a rhythm, and the ticking helped him focus. About a year later, a young couple moved in, Mark and Sarah. They were friendly enough, but they weren't Jack. They gutted the place, painted everything magnolia, and turned Jack's workshop into a normal garden shed. Life moved on, as it does. Fast forward to 1987. I was 15 by then, and Mark and Sarah had a baby girl named Emma. They'd occasionally ask me to babysit, which I didn't mind. They paid well, and their house had satellite TV with MTV, which we didn't have at home. One Friday night in November, they asked if I could watch Emma while they went to a work dinner. It was supposed to be a straightforward evening. Emma was already asleep when I arrived at 7, and they weren't planning to be back until around midnight. The first few hours were completely normal. I made myself a sandwich, flipped through their magazines, and settled in to watch music videos with the volume low so I wouldn't wake the baby. Their cat, Misty, was curled up on the armchair across from me. It was around 10:30 when it happened. I was half watching some new Madonna video when I heard it, a tapping sound coming from the small side table near the sofa. At first, I thought it was just the house settling, or maybe something to do with the radiators, but then I realized it wasn't random. There was a pattern to it, almost musical. Tap, 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 pause, tap, tap, pause, tap, tap, tap. I muted the TV and turned toward the sound. The table was just a small wooden one with a lamp and a few magazines on it. Nothing that should be making noise. Yet the tapping continued, clear as day. It wasn't loud, but in the quiet house, it was unmistakable. What happened next still gives me goosebumps. Misty the cat, who had been sleeping peacefully, suddenly sat bolt upright, ears perked, staring directly at the table. That's when I knew I wasn't imagining it. The tapping continued for about 15 seconds more. Not random knocking, but distinct notes, like someone playing a simple tune with their fingers. Then it stopped. The silence felt heavier than before. I didn't move for what felt like minutes, but was probably only seconds. Every hair on my arms and the back of my neck was standing up. It wasn't that I felt afraid exactly. More like hyper-aware, like every nerve in my body was on high alert. You know that expression about someone walking over your grave? That's what it felt like. After I gathered my courage, I reached out and tapped the table myself. It made a similar sound, but I couldn't recreate the varied notes I'd heard. The wood was solid, not hollow. There was nothing inside or underneath it that could explain the sounds. I got up and checked the entire house. The front and back doors were locked. Emma was still sound asleep in her crib. No windows were open. The heating wasn't making any unusual noises. I was completely alone, or at least I should have been. When I returned to the living room, Misty was sitting on the table now, purring and kneading the spot where the tapping had come from. I sat back down, keeping my eyes on the table, but the sound never returned. Mark and Sarah came home around 11:30, earlier than expected. I didn't mention anything about the tapping. What would I even say? I think your table was playing music by itself. They'd think I was either making it up or that I'd fallen asleep and dreamed it, but I hadn't dreamed it, and I know Misty heard it too. It was only on my walk home, passing by the spot where Jack had been found that terrible morning, that a chill ran through me. The tapping pattern, it had reminded me of something, but I couldn't place it until that moment. It was similar to the rhythm Jack's steam engine made when it was running at full tilt, that distinctive beat that filled his workshop while he worked. I never experienced anything like that again in their house, though I babysat for them many more times. Was it Jack somehow? I don't know. I've never been religious or spiritual. I don't believe in an afterlife, but I also can't explain what happened that night. Sometimes I wonder if Jack, who died trying to get someone's attention, was still trying to reach out, or maybe it was just a bizarre coincidence. Old houses make strange noises after all. Maybe the table had absorbed the vibrations from that exact spot where Jack's workshop once stood, where his steam engine had run for years. The rational part of me knows there must be a logical explanation, but another part of me, the part that remembers Jack's kindness and his passion for mechanical precision, wonders if somehow, just for those 15 seconds, something of him came back. Not as a scary ghost, but as a familiar rhythm, a final farewell from the steam engineer next door. I still have that brass compass he gave me. Sometimes I take it out and look at it, and I swear I can almost hear that tapping again, faint but precise, like someone keeping time to music only they can hear. Story 5. Horloge. I've been debating whether to share this for months now. I'm not someone who believes in ghosts or any kind of paranormal stuff, honestly. I've always been the practical one in my family, the one who checks for logical explanations first. But what happened in my dad's office apartment has completely shaken my understanding of reality, and I still don't have answers that make sense. My dad, Samuel, got a job transfer to Westfield last year, taking over for some guy who'd suddenly quit. The company had this corporate building where some employees had these small apartment units attached to their offices, kind of like efficiency apartments, something about being able to work late and not having to commute during busy project seasons. My dad was assigned one of these units, and my mom Elizabeth fixed it up to make it feel homier whenever she visited. I was away at college when all this happened, but when spring break rolled around, I decided to visit them instead of going on the typical beach trip with friends. I needed to save money anyway, and I figured some home-cooked meals and free laundry wouldn't hurt. When I arrived, my mom showed me around the office apartment. It was actually pretty nice, much nicer than I expected. There was a small kitchenette, a living area with a couch, my parents' bedroom, and what they called the guest room where I'd be staying. Something felt off about that room the moment I stepped into it. It wasn't anything I could put my finger on, just a weird feeling that made the hair on my arms stand up. We had to do a lot of work on this room, my mom said, almost apologetically. It was completely sealed off when your dad got the apartment. Sealed off? I asked, running my hand along the wall. It felt colder than the rest of the apartment. Yeah, weird, right? There was drywall covering the entire entrance. We only discovered it when your dad noticed the building layout didn't match the actual apartment space. The maintenance guys came and opened it up, and now you have a place to sleep when you visit. She seemed proud of the transformation. My mom had done her best with it. Fresh paint, new carpet, a comfortable-looking bed with my favorite type of sheets. But despite all her efforts, something about the room felt wrong, like it was holding its breath. That first night, I was exhausted from the drive. After dinner with my parents, I showered and got ready for bed. The bathroom was across the hall from my room, and I didn't want to keep opening and closing doors in the middle of the night if I needed to use it. "Mom, is it okay if I leave my bedroom door open tonight?" I asked, just so I can get to the bathroom easier. "Of course, honey. Sleep well." I remember checking twice that the door was propped open before I climbed into bed. I even put my backpack against it to make sure it stayed that way. I fell asleep almost immediately, completely drained. I woke up around 3 in the morning. The first thing I noticed was that the room was pitch black. That didn't seem right. There should have been some light coming from the hallway with the door open. Then I heard it, the sound of the doorknob jiggling, not aggressively but deliberately, like someone was testing to see if it was locked. My entire body went cold. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The door was closed, even though I distinctly remembered leaving it open, and now someone, or something, was trying the handle. The jiggling stopped after a few seconds, but I remained frozen, my heart hammering so loudly I was sure whoever was out there could hear it. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe my dad got up to check on me and accidentally closed the door. Maybe the air circulation in the apartment caused it to swing shut. But none of those explanations accounted for the doorknob movement. I don't know how long I lay there, paralyzed with fear. It felt like hours. Eventually, I couldn't stand it anymore. I had to know what was on the other side of that door. I reached for my phone, turned on the flashlight, and slowly, my entire body shaking, made my way across the room. When I finally gathered enough courage to yank the door open, there was nothing. Just the empty hallway, the bathroom door still ajar across from me, exactly as I'd left it hours ago. The rest of the apartment was silent. My parents' door was closed and I could hear my dad's faint snoring. I checked the entire apartment with my phone flashlight, feeling ridiculous but too terrified to go back to that room without making sure everything was normal. Nothing was out of place, no sign of an intruder, no explanation for why my door had closed or why the handle had jiggled. I spent the rest of the night on the living room couch with all the lights on. When my parents woke up, I made up some excuse about not being able to sleep in an unfamiliar bed. I didn't want to freak them out, and honestly, I felt stupid. What was I going to say? I think there's a ghost in my room. That wasn't me. I didn't believe in that stuff. The next night, I reluctantly returned to the guest room, this time leaving the door closed and locked. I figured whatever had happened the night before was just my imagination or some weird fluke. I was overtired from the drive, probably dreaming. I fell into a restless sleep and had the most vivid nightmare I've ever experienced. In the dream, I opened my eyes to see a man hanging from the ceiling directly above my bed. He wasn't suspended by anything. He was just there, defying gravity, his body parallel to the ceiling. His eyes were bulging, bloodshot, and staring directly at me. He wore a flannel shirt and overalls, with these distinctive work boots that had an unusual red stripe along the side. The look on his face wasn't threatening. It was desperate, like he was trying to tell me something but couldn't speak. I woke up gasping, covered in sweat, and spent the rest of the night with the lights on, unable to look at the ceiling. The next morning, I felt ridiculous again. Just a nightmare, I told myself. But something made me mention it at breakfast. I had this super weird dream last night, I said casually, trying not to sound freaked out. There was this guy watching me from the ceiling. He had on a flannel shirt and these overalls, and these work boots with red stripes on them. My dad's coffee cup froze halfway to his mouth. He exchanged a look with my mom that made my stomach drop. "What?" I asked. "Nothing," my dad said quickly. "Just a strange dream." But I could tell something was wrong. My dad's not a good liar. Later that day, when my mom went out shopping, I confronted him. "Dad, what was that look about this morning?" When I mentioned my dream, he sighed heavily, like he was deciding whether to tell me something. Finally, he sat down across from me. "I didn't want to tell you this because I didn't want to scare you," he began. "But the guy who had this office before me, Jack, they found him dead in that room." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean, in that room?" "The guest room. It wasn't a room when I got here. Jack had built it himself, apparently. Nobody knew about it. When he stopped showing up for work, everyone just thought he'd quit. It wasn't until people in the offices below started complaining about a smell that they found him. He'd been dead for almost a week. I felt sick. And you put me in there to sleep? We had no choice for where to put the guest room. It's the only extra space in the apartment. And the company completely renovated it. They ripped everything out, put in new walls, new flooring, everything. There's nothing left of what was there before." He hesitated. "But the way you described the man in your dream, flannel shirt, overalls, those specific boots with the red stripe, that's exactly how Jack dressed. Everyone in the office would recognize that description." I couldn't speak. How could I have dreamed about a man I'd never seen, never even heard described, and the way he was watching me from the ceiling? "Dad, how did he die?" I asked, though I was terrified to hear the answer. They never said officially, just that it was ruled accidental, but there were rumors. What rumors? He looked uncomfortable, that he hanged himself in that room. I moved out to the couch for the remainder of my visit. My parents didn't question it, which told me they were just as unsettled as I was. My mom even mentioned that despite multiple professional cleanings, she could never quite get rid of a certain smell in that room. Not strong, just present. A constant reminder. On my last day there, curiosity got the better of me. While my parents were at work, I went back into the guest room and really looked at it for the first time. The walls appeared newer than the rest of the apartment. The ceiling had been recently painted. Everything looked normal, except for one corner where the wall met the ceiling. There was a small, almost imperceptible discoloration, a faint brownish stain that the paint couldn't quite cover. I stood there staring at that spot when suddenly the temperature in the room plummeted. I'm not exaggerating. It was like stepping into a freezer. My breath actually fogged in front of me. And then I felt it, the unmistakable sensation of someone standing directly behind me. I could feel breath on the back of my neck. I ran out of that room and didn't go back in for the rest of my visit. I later learned from one of my dad's co-workers that Jack had been a loner. No family, few friends. He'd built that hidden room himself, sealing it off so no one would know it existed. No one knows why. Some people think he was paranoid. Others think he was hiding from someone. Whatever the reason, that room became his tomb. My dad still works there, but my mom refuses to stay overnight in the apartment anymore. They've left the guest room untouched, door closed, like they're pretending it doesn't exist. My dad says sometimes when he's working late, he hears noises coming from behind that door, the sound of footsteps pacing back and forth, sometimes the faint sound of tapping on the walls. I don't know what happened in that room. I don't know why Jack built it or how he died there. All I know is that whatever presence remains doesn't want to be forgotten. Sometimes I still dream about him watching me from the ceiling, his eyes pleading, like he's trying to tell his story to anyone who will listen. I'm back at school now, hundreds of miles away from that place, but I still wake up sometimes in the middle of the night, feeling like someone is jiggling my doorknob, testing to see if it's locked. And in those moments, I swear I can still smell that faint, unmistakable odor that no amount of cleaning could ever remove. Story 6. I've never told many people about this. It's just too weird, and I guess I've spent most of my life convincing myself it didn't happen the way I remember it. But after what Eve told me last month, I can't stop thinking about it again. I was 8 years old when it happened. This would have been around 1997, living with my mom in Pine Grove, just your average suburban neighborhood with those cookie-cutter houses and kids riding bikes in the street. We had this little 2-story place with faded blue siding that my mom was always saying she'd repaint next summer. Never did, of course. It was a Wednesday afternoon in August. I remember because my mom always worked the early shift on Wednesdays and would come home and take a nap. School hadn't started yet, and I was bored out of my mind. The TV was on, some cartoon I wasn't really watching, and I was flipping through a Goosebumps book I'd already read twice. Mom had gone upstairs to nap around 1 o'clock. She always told me not to wake her unless there was an emergency or someone was at the door. I remember the house being really quiet except for the low volume of the TV. It was that weird afternoon quiet where even the air feels still. I was sitting on our old brown couch, the one with the scratchy fabric that left marks on your legs if you wore shorts. My legs were tucked under me, and I had that book propped against the armrest. I remember feeling drowsy from the heat. We didn't have air conditioning, just this old box fan that wasn't doing much. I don't know what made me look up. I didn't hear anything. Maybe it was just that feeling you get when you realize you're being watched. When I raised my head, my heart literally stopped for a second. Looming, in the space between our living room and the kitchen was this thing. My brain immediately registered it as a praying mantis, but that doesn't make any sense because this thing was huge. I'm not exaggerating when I say it was nearly touching our ceiling. Our ceilings weren't vaulted or anything special. standard 8-foot height, and this thing's head was almost brushing against it. Its body was this pale greenish-yellow color, and it had those distinctive folded front legs like mantises do, held up close to its body. The head was triangular with these massive compound eyes that seemed to take up most of its face. They were dark, not black exactly, more like a really deep green that looked black unless the light hit them just right. I couldn't move, like physically could not move a muscle. I wasn't paralyzed in the medical sense, but it was like my body instinctively knew that movement would be dangerous. I remember thinking that if I stayed completely still, maybe it wouldn't notice me, like how you're supposed to act with wild animals. The weirdest part, it didn't move either. It just stood there, watching. I couldn't tell if it was looking directly at me or not because of those huge alien eyes, but I felt observed. I remember desperately trying not to make eye contact, though I couldn't explain why. Something in my gut told me that would be bad. The room felt different with it in there. The air seemed heavier, and there was this weird pressure in my ears like when you're on an airplane. Time got all stretched out. I have no idea if it stood there for 2 minutes or 20. All I know is that it felt like forever, sitting there trying not to breathe too loudly, afraid to even blink. I remember noticing details about it that still don't make sense. It didn't cast a shadow, which seems impossible for something that big. And though it was right there in front of me, clear as day, there was something not quite solid about it. Like if I squinted, I could almost see the outline of our kitchen door frame through parts of it. The TV was still on, but I couldn't hear it anymore. Either the sound had cut out, or my brain had just stopped processing it. The only thing I could hear was my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Then, after what felt like an eternity, I felt something shift. Nothing visible changed, but the pressure in the room eased slightly. I took this as my chance and bolted. I didn't look back to see if it followed. I just ran straight up the stairs to my mom's bedroom, taking them 2 at a time, convinced the whole way that I'd feel those long, spindly arms grabbing me from behind. I burst into my mom's room, shaking her awake, practically hysterical. She was annoyed at first. I'd broken the emergency-only rule, but then got concerned when she saw how terrified I was. When I managed to stammer out something about a giant bug downstairs, her expression changed to that patient look parents get when dealing with kid imaginations. "Sweetie, it's probably just a regular mantis that got in. They look bigger when you're scared," she said, getting up with a sigh. I tried to explain that no, this wasn't normal. It was as tall as the ceiling, but I couldn't get the words out right. I was still shaking, and she was already heading downstairs to show me there was nothing to be afraid of. I followed her, clinging to her bathrobe, half hiding behind her as we went down. The whole time, I was dreading what would happen when we got to the living room. Would it still be there? Would my mom see it too? Would it do something to us? But when we reached the bottom of the stairs and turned into the living room, it was gone. The TV was still on, my book was still on the couch where I'd dropped it, and everything looked completely normal. No giant mantis. No evidence anything had been there at all. Mom looked around perfunctorily, even checked behind the couch and under the coffee table. "See? Nothing here, probably just a regular bug that flew away." I knew what I'd seen wasn't a regular bug, but I also knew she wouldn't believe me if I insisted it had been giant. I was already embarrassed for freaking out, and the rational part of my brain was starting to question myself too. Had I fallen asleep? Had it been a weird daydream? But it had felt so real. In the end, I just nodded and let her believe I'd overreacted to a normal insect. She made me a sandwich and put on a movie to distract me, and by dinner, I was almost convinced I'd imagined the whole thing. Almost. But that night, and for weeks afterward, I insisted on sleeping with my bedroom door closed tight and a towel stuffed under the gap at the bottom. I couldn't explain why, but I was terrified that thing would come upstairs looking for me. As I got older, I mostly convinced myself it had been some kind of waking dream or a kid's overactive imagination. I never talked about it. What would I say? Hey, once I saw a giant praying mantis in my living room, people would think I was crazy, so I buried it. For years, it was just this weird childhood memory that I didn't examine too closely. Then, about a month ago, I was at a small get-together at my friend Eve's apartment. It was late, most people had left, and we were having one of those deep late-night conversations that happen when you're comfortable with someone. Somehow we got on the topic of unexplainable experiences. Eve started telling me about something that happened to her in college. She and some friends had taken mushrooms at someone's cabin in the woods. Things had gotten intense, and two of her friends started panicking, saying they couldn't remember how to breathe properly. Eve was the least affected and was trying to calm them down, but was starting to freak out herself because she didn't know what to do. And then, she said, she wasn't alone anymore. There were these beings in the room with them, praying mantis beings, she called them, tall, with those triangular heads and huge eyes. But instead of being scared, she felt an immediate sense of calm. She said they didn't speak out loud, but somehow communicated with her, telling her exactly what to do to help her friends. They told me to just breathe deeply and slowly and have my friends mirror me, she said. It sounds so simple, but in that moment it felt like profound wisdom. I did what they suggested, and within minutes everyone had calmed down. My blood ran cold as she described them. Everything, the height, the color, the eyes, matched what I'd seen as a kid. I felt dizzy, like the floor was tilting under me. Eve noticed my reaction and stopped. "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." I told her everything then, every detail I could remember about my visitor from when I was 8. I'd never told anyone the full story before, and once I started, I couldn't stop. My hands were shaking by the time I finished. Eve was quiet for a long time. Then she said something that's been echoing in my head ever since. What if they're real, Liam? What if there's some kind of interdimensional beings that can appear to us under certain circumstances? We stayed up until sunrise discussing possibilities. Were they hallucinations, guardian angels, aliens, some kind of psychic projection? None of the explanations felt quite right, but the coincidence was too strange to ignore. I've spent the last month researching similar experiences online. There are others who claim to have seen mantis-like entities, often during meditation, psychedelic experiences, or in that space between waking and sleep. Many describe feeling a sense of wisdom or ancient knowledge coming from these beings. But I wasn't on drugs, I wasn't meditating. I was just a kid sitting on a couch on a regular Wednesday afternoon. Why did it appear to me? What did it want? And why didn't it do anything but stand there? I still don't have answers. Sometimes I almost convince myself it never happened. But then I remember the absolute certainty I felt in that moment. The undeniable presence of something impossible standing in my living room. The memory is too vivid, too detailed to dismiss. Whatever it was, it changed me. Even after all these years, I still sometimes get that feeling of being watched when I'm alone in a quiet room. And I still, to this day, can't look at a praying mantis without my heart racing. I don't know if I'll ever understand what happened that day, but knowing Eve saw something so similar makes me feel less alone with this bizarre memory, less crazy. And maybe someday we'll find an explanation that makes sense of it all, or maybe some things just aren't meant to be explained. Story 7. I still get goosebumps thinking about what happened to me last year. I've never been the type to believe in ghosts or anything supernatural, but after what I experienced, I'm not so sure anymore. It was the beginning of my freshman year of high school, and we had just started our swimming unit in PE. I was never a strong swimmer growing up. My parents didn't prioritize swimming lessons, and we didn't have easy access to pools in our neighborhood. So when Coach Barton announced we'd be spending 3 weeks in the school pool, I was a mix of nervous and excited. The first few days were basic stuff, learning proper form, practicing different strokes, and getting comfortable in the water. I wasn't the best in the class, but I wasn't terrible either. By the end of the first week, I was feeling pretty confident about my abilities. On the 5th day of the unit, it was a Wednesday, September 12th, Coach Barton had us doing various swimming drills. During our free swim period at the end of class, a few of the guys started challenging each other to see who could hold their breath underwater the longest. Tyler Mendoza was the reigning champ at 1 minute and 20 seconds. I decided I wanted to try. The pool was divided into sections based on depth. and I chose to do my breath holding in the 6-foot section where I could sit at the bottom without floating up. When my turn came, I took several deep breaths, then one final big inhale before plunging under. I pushed myself to the bottom and crossed my legs, letting all the air out of my lungs slowly to help me stay down. I closed my eyes and focused on staying calm. The world went quiet except for the muffled underwater sounds and my own heartbeat thumping in my ears. It was actually kind of peaceful. I was probably about 45 seconds in when it happened. Clear as day, I heard a young boy's voice say, "Please breathe." Not "you need to breathe" or "come up for air." Just those 2 words, spoken calmly but firmly. "Please breathe." I was so startled I gasped, immediately sucking in water. I pushed off the bottom and shot to the surface, coughing and sputtering. My eyes darted around wildly, looking for whoever had spoken to me, but there was no one close by. The nearest classmates were at least 15 feet away, all engaged in their own activities, and they were all teenagers. No young children anywhere in sight. Coach Barton noticed me coughing and asked if I was okay. I nodded, still trying to process what had just happened. The voice had been so clear, so distinct. It wasn't my imagination or my own thoughts. It sounded like a young boy, maybe 4 or 5 years old, speaking directly into my ear. After class, I told my friend Marcus about it as we changed in the locker room. "Dude, that's creepy as hell," he said, pulling his shirt over his head. "You sure you weren't just hearing things because you were running out of oxygen or something?" I wasn't even close to my limit, I insisted, and it was so clear, like someone was right next to me underwater. Marcus shrugged. "Maybe you're being haunted," he joked, wiggling his fingers at me. I punched him in the arm, but honestly, his words sent a chill down my spine. We dropped the subject and headed to our next classes, but I couldn't stop thinking about that voice for the rest of the day. The swimming unit continued, and I didn't have any more weird experiences in the pool. After a few days, I'd mostly forgotten about the incident, chalking it up to some weird auditory hallucination. Then, exactly 1 week later, on September 19th, something happened that I still can't explain. I had stayed after school for a study session in the library. My mom was picking me up, but instead of waiting at the main entrance, I decided to wait near the back of the school, closer to the gym and pool. It was a spot I'd never really hung out at before, but it was a nice day, and I wanted some fresh air after being cooped up in the library. There was a small garden area with a few benches, and as I wandered around waiting for my mom's text, I noticed something I hadn't seen before, a memorial rock partially hidden behind some bushes. It was a smooth, flat stone about the size of a dinner plate, embedded in the ground with a small plaque attached to it. Curious, I knelt down to read the inscription. The plaque read, "In loving memory of Zerky Rainey, 2013-2017, forever in our hearts." I didn't think much of it at first, just sad that such a young kid had died. But something compelled me to take a picture of the memorial with my phone. I sent it to Marcus with the caption, "Found this memorial near the gym. Sad." Less than a minute later, my phone buzzed with his reply. "Look at the death date." I zoomed in on the photo I'd taken and felt my blood run cold. According to the plaque, Zerky had died on September 12th. The exact same day I'd heard that voice in the pool. My hands were shaking as I called Marcus instead of texting back. "Are you seeing this?" I asked as soon as he picked up. "Yeah, that's messed up," Marcus replied, his voice uncharacteristically serious. "Same exact day you heard that kid's voice underwater." "It has to be a coincidence," I said, but even I didn't believe that. "I don't know, man. This is some sixth sense type stuff." We stayed on the phone while I Googled Zerky Rainey on my phone. It didn't take long to find information about him. There had been a small news article in the local paper about his death. According to the article, Zerky was a 4-year-old boy who had been killed in an accident at our school. He had been walking with his mother, who worked as an administrative assistant, when he ran ahead and was accidentally struck by a delivery truck that was backing up to the school kitchen. The accident had happened right where I was standing, in the back area near the gym and pool entrance. I felt sick to my stomach as I read the article to Marcus. The timing couldn't be a coincidence. Somehow I had heard the voice of a dead child while underwater, exactly 4 years to the day after his death. I need to find out more, I told Marcus. Over the next few days, I did more research. I found out that after Zerke's death, his father had written a book called Letters to Zerke about coping with the loss of his son. The local library had a copy, and I checked it out immediately. The book contained photos of Zerke, a smiling little boy with curly brown hair and bright eyes. Reading it felt invasive somehow, like I was prying into a family's deepest grief, but I couldn't stop myself. I needed to understand the connection. One detail in the book stood out to me. Zerke's father wrote about how his son had been taking swimming lessons in the months before his death. He described how proud they were when Zerke first learned to hold his breath underwater, something he had been afraid to do at first. My skin prickled with goosebumps when I read that passage. It felt like too much of a connection to dismiss. I decided to visit the memorial again. This time I brought a small toy car I'd found in my closet, something I thought a 4-year-old boy might like. I felt stupid doing it, but I placed it next to the stone and sat on a nearby bench. "I don't know if you can hear me," I said quietly, feeling ridiculous but compelled to speak anyway. "But thank you for whatever that was in the pool. I wasn't in any danger, but thanks for looking out for me." I sat there for about 20 minutes, feeling the breeze and trying to make sense of everything. I didn't hear any ghostly voices or see any apparitions, but I felt a strange sense of peace. As I got up to leave, a sudden gust of wind blew through the garden, strong enough to make the branches of the nearby trees sway dramatically. The toy car I'd placed by the memorial tipped over and rolled a few inches, probably just the wind, but it gave me chills nonetheless. Since then, I've thought a lot about what happened. I've come up with various theories. Maybe Zerke's spirit still lingers around the school where he died. Maybe he saw me underwater and, in his child's mind, thought I was in danger. Unable to distinguish between someone holding their breath for fun and someone drowning, he tried to help the only way he could, by telling me to breathe. I know how crazy this all sounds. If someone told me this story a year ago, I'd think they were making it up or were seriously disturbed. But I know what I heard. I know the coincidence of the dates, and I know how I felt standing by that memorial stone. I still swim in our school pool for PE class. Sometimes, when I'm underwater, I feel a strange presence, like someone is watching over me. It doesn't scare me anymore. If anything, it's comforting. I haven't told many people about this, just Marcus and now all of you. Most people would think I'm crazy or looking for attention. But I know what happened, and I believe that somehow, for reasons I'll never fully understand, a little boy named Zerke Rainey reached out from whatever comes after this life to tell me, simply, please breathe. I don't think I was in any real danger that day in the pool. I wasn't close to drowning, but maybe Zerke couldn't tell the difference. Or maybe he was just making sure I didn't meet the same fate he did, in a different way. I'll never know for sure, but I do know that I'll never forget his voice, or the chill that ran through me when I realized whose voice it might have been, and I'll never forget the lesson I took from it all. Life is fragile, as fleeting as a breath held underwater, and sometimes the most profound warnings come from the most unexpected sources. Story 8. I've never been a person who was afraid of the dark. Growing up, I always thought ghost stories were just that, stories. But what happened to me last year changed everything I believe about this world. I need to get this off my chest because I still have nightmares, and writing it down might help me process what happened. I moved to Millbrook last January with my roommate Michael. We found this old house from 1902 that was surprisingly affordable for its size. The landlord seemed eager to rent it out, which should have been my first red flag. But the place had character, high ceilings, original woodwork, and enough space for both of us to have our own areas. Plus, it allowed pets, which was perfect since I have a German Shepherd named Rex. From day one, Something felt off about the house. The layout was weird. There were sealed crawl spaces that extended way beyond where they should, going under the yard and even the driveway. Some of the walls weren't quite straight, and certain doors wouldn't close properly no matter how much we adjusted them. Michael and I joked that the builders must have been drunk, but looking back, I don't think that explains it. About 3 weeks after moving in, I started hearing things. At first, it was so subtle I thought I was imagining it. Whispers coming from the basement that were too quiet to make out. I'd be sitting in the living room watching TV, and during quiet moments, I'd hear what sounded like a conversation happening below me. I mentioned it to Michael, and to my surprise, he admitted he'd heard it too. "I thought it was just the pipes or something," he said, but we both knew it wasn't. I've had a few unexplainable experiences before, seeing shadows move in my childhood home, lights turning on by themselves in my college apartment. But this was different. These voices weren't residual or random, they seemed to respond to us. If we walked heavily across the floor or dropped something, they'd stop for a while before starting again. Then came the incident that made me realize we weren't dealing with just weird acoustics or overactive imaginations. I was home alone one afternoon while Michael was at work. Rex was napping in my room, and I was in the kitchen making lunch. Suddenly, clear as day, I heard a man cough 3 times. Not from outside, not from upstairs, from the basement. 3 distinct coughs, like someone clearing their throat. My body went cold. There was absolutely no mistaking what I'd heard or where it came from. I called out, thinking maybe Michael had come home early, but there was no response. Rex woke up and started barking wildly, running to the basement door and growling in a way I'd never seen before. I grabbed my phone and my shotgun, yes, I own one for protection, and locked myself in my bedroom. I called Michael, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. "Someone's in the house," I whispered when he answered. Michael rushed home and we searched every inch of that basement together, guns drawn. Nothing. No signs of entry, no disturbed items, no footprints in the dusty corners. But I know what I heard. Someone, or something, had been down there. After that, Rex's behavior changed completely. He'd never been a nervous dog, but suddenly he was refusing to go into certain parts of the house. He'd stand at the threshold of rooms, hackles raised, growling at empty corners. Sometimes he'd wake up in the middle of the night and start barking at the wall. The worst was how he acted around the basement door. He'd pace back and forth in front of it, whining and occasionally lunging at it like he was trying to get at something on the other side. When we'd take him down there, he'd cower and try to get back upstairs as quickly as possible. About 2 months into living there, the tapping started. I was up late one night working on my laptop when I heard it, a rhythmic tap 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 on my bedroom window. At first I thought it was a tree branch, but when I looked outside, there was nothing there that could have caused it. The tapping continued, steady and deliberate, for almost an hour. When I turned on the outside light, it stopped. This happened the next night too, and the night after that, always starting around 2 in the morning, always stopping when I turned on the lights. Except on the 4th night, the tapping didn't stop. Even with every light in the room and outside blazing, something was still tapping on my window. I called my buddy Tom, who lived nearby. He came over and walked the entire perimeter of the house with a flashlight. He found nothing, but the moment, and I mean the exact moment, his truck pulled away from the curb, the tapping stopped completely. It never happened again. By this point, Michael was experiencing things too. He'd wake up feeling like someone was sitting on the edge of his bed. He'd see movement out of the corner of his eye. Once, he swore he saw a man standing in the hallway when he got up to use the bathroom, but when he turned on the light, no one was there. I decided to do some renovations, thinking maybe if we changed the space it would feel more like ours and less haunted. I started with a small room in the basement that we'd been using for storage. The carpet down there was disgusting. Old, moldy, and stained. I figured replacing it would be an easy weekend project. When I pulled up that nasty carpet, what I found underneath made my stomach drop. The concrete floor was painted red, bright red, and it was the only room in the house with a painted floor except for one other room in the basement. Something about it felt wrong. The paint was thick in some places, thin in others. In the worn areas where the paint had been walked on the most, the concrete showed through, but it wasn't the gray I expected. It was darker, with a reddish tint. I keep cleaning supplies in the basement, including a bottle of hydrogen peroxide. On a hunch that still makes me sick to think about, I poured some on one of those darker patches. The entire area immediately started bubbling and fizzing. For those who don't know, that's what happens when peroxide meets blood. Even old blood. I backed away so fast I knocked over the shelves behind me. Someone had bled on that floor, a lot, and then someone had painted over it. I told Michael what I'd found, and we spent the next few hours inspecting the other red-floored room. Same thing, beneath the worn areas of paint, the concrete tested positive for blood with the peroxide. That night, the voices in the basement were louder than ever. I could almost make out words, almost understand what they were saying. Rex refused to go downstairs at all anymore, and honestly, I didn't blame him. We started researching the history of the house. The county records showed it had changed hands unusually often over the decades. No one seemed to stay more than a few years. There were gaps in the ownership records too, periods where it sat vacant. But we couldn't find any specific incidents or deaths recorded there. Then things escalated. I was alone in the house again. Michael was on a weekend trip with his girlfriend. I was in the kitchen making dinner when every cabinet door and drawer slammed open simultaneously. Not just one or two, all of them, with enough force that some items fell onto the floor. It was like a pressure wave had moved through the room. I ran upstairs to get Rex, who was hiding under my bed, shaking. We got in my car and I drove to a hotel for the night. I couldn't bring myself to go back in there alone. When Michael returned, we agreed to set up some cameras. We put one in the basement pointing at the stairs, one in the hallway upstairs, and one in the living room. For 3 days, nothing happened. At least, nothing that showed up on camera. But we were still hearing the voices, still feeling like we were being watched. On the 4th night, the basement camera captured something. Around 3 in the morning, a dark shadow moved across the frame. Not a person-shaped shadow, but something like a cloud of darkness that seemed to absorb the light around it. The timestamp on the video jumped forward 2 minutes after the shadow appeared, like the camera had malfunctioned. When we went down to check the camera the next morning, it was unplugged. Neither of us had gone down there. The final straw came about 6 months after we moved in. I was in the shower when I felt something touch my shoulder. I turned around, expecting to see the shower curtain had blown against me, but instead there was a handprint on the steamy glass door, a handprint that had been made from the outside, pressing in. I got out of that shower so fast I nearly broke my neck. Wrapped in a towel, I ran to my room where Rex was going absolutely ballistic, barking at my closet door. When I opened it, all my clothes had been pulled off their hangers and piled on the floor. We moved out the next day, left most of our stuff behind. It wasn't worth going back for. I still drive by that house sometimes. There's a new family living there now. I think about warning them, but what would I say? Hey, your basement floor is painted red to cover up blood stains, and something in your house likes to tap on windows and cough when no one's around. They'd think I was crazy. Maybe I am. But Rex still refuses to go near that street, and Michael and I still have nightmares about those voices in the basement. Whatever happened in that house, whatever tragedy left its mark on those red-painted floors, it's still there, waiting, watching. And sometimes when I'm falling asleep at night, I swear I can still hear that tap, tap, tap on my window. Story 9. I've never been the type to believe in ghosts or spirits or whatever you want to call them. I was always the skeptical one in my friend group, the one who rolled my eyes whenever someone talked about paranormal stuff. But what happened to me 3 weeks ago completely changed my perspective, and I still can't shake the feeling of dread that comes over me when I think about it. I live in Ravenwood, this really quiet suburb where nothing ever happens. Seriously, the most exciting thing around here is when someone gets a new mailbox. My boyfriend Mark and I have been living together for about 2 years now in this small 2-bedroom house we're renting. It's nothing fancy, but it's cozy, and it's ours. That night started like any other. I had been working extra hours, shadowing at the local hospital in the sterile processing department. It's not the most glamorous job, but I'm trying to get my foot in the door for a healthcare career. My job was basically to clean and sterilize surgical tools from the operating rooms. It's meticulous work. You have to make sure everything is completely sanitized before it goes back into circulation. I remember being especially tired that night because we'd had a busy day at the hospital. There had been several emergency surgeries, and I had stayed late to help process all the instruments. By the time I got home, I was completely exhausted. Mark and I ate a quick dinner, watched some mindless TV, and headed to bed around 11:30. I fell asleep almost instantly, that deep, heavy kind of sleep where you feel like you're sinking into the mattress. Mark was beside me, sleeping on his usual side of the bed, the right side. I was on my left side, facing away from him toward the wall. Everything was normal, until it wasn't. I woke up suddenly. Not the gradual kind of waking up, but that jarring, heart-racing kind where you go from completely asleep to wide awake in a split second. The room was dark except for the faint glow from the digital clock on my nightstand, which read 3:14 in the morning, and that's when I felt it. There was someone, or something, standing on the left side of my bed. I couldn't see it clearly, not with my eyes anyway. It was more like I could sense it there. Like when you know someone is staring at you even though your back is turned, except this was 1,000 times more intense. I could somehow perceive that it had a humanoid shape, standing perfectly still, just watching me. The presence felt heavy, cold, like it was sucking all the warmth from that side of the room. And there was this overwhelming sense of wrongness, like something that shouldn't exist in our world was standing right there, inches from where I lay. I tried to move, to turn and look directly at it, but I couldn't. My body felt paralyzed with fear. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, and I was struggling to breathe. The weird thing is, I thought I was being completely silent. In my mind, I was just lying there, frozen in terror, but apparently I was screaming. Mark told me later that he woke up to the most horrible sound he'd ever heard coming from me. He said it was like a banshee wail, not a normal scream at all, but something primal and terrified. The strangest part, I couldn't hear myself screaming. In my perception, the room was completely silent except for the sound of my heart thundering in my chest. Mark grabbed me by the shoulders and started shaking me, saying my name over and over. "Emma, Emma, what's wrong? What's happening?" When I finally turned to look at him, the spell broke. The presence vanished, or at least I couldn't sense it anymore. But the fear that stayed with me, it was like ice in my veins. I couldn't explain what had happened. When I tried to speak, the words wouldn't come out right. My thoughts were scattered, and I was shaking uncontrollably. All I could manage to say was, "Switch sides with me, please. Switch sides with me right now." Mark looked confused and worried, but he didn't argue. We switched places, and I immediately pulled the blanket up to my chin, feeling like a terrified child hiding from monsters. I was so scared that whatever had been standing there would come back if I was on that side of the bed again. Mark held me tight for the rest of the night, but I couldn't sleep, not a wink. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, every muscle in my body tense and ready to flee. The fear wouldn't go away, and that's how I knew this wasn't just a nightmare. I've had nightmares before, we all have, but the fear fades quickly once you're fully awake. This was different. This terror stayed with me, raw and real, hour after hour. When the first light of dawn finally crept through our curtains, I felt a small measure of relief, but I was still on edge. Mark had to go to work, but he was reluctant to leave me alone. I insisted I would be fine, even though I wasn't convinced of that myself. As soon as he left, I started researching online. I looked up sleep paralysis, night terrors, hypnagogic hallucinations, anything that might explain what had happened. Some of it seemed to fit, but none of it fully explained the overwhelming sense that there had been a real presence in our room. Then I remembered something my grandmother used to do. She was part Native American and believed strongly in spiritual cleansing. I drove to this little New Age shop in town and bought a bundle of cedar. They didn't have sage. I also picked up some sea salt and a few white candles. When I got home, I opened all the windows, even though it was freezing outside. I lit the cedar and went through every room in the house, letting the smoke fill each corner. I sprinkled sea salt along all the windowsills and doorways, and I placed a lit candle in each room. I don't know if I was doing it right. I was just going off what I remembered and what felt right in the moment. The whole time I was doing this, I was speaking out loud, saying things like, "This is my home. You are not welcome here. You need to leave now and go toward the light." I probably sounded ridiculous, but I was desperate to do something, anything, to make sure whatever had visited me wouldn't come back. After I finished, I sat in the living room with all the lights on until Mark got home. He found me there, still jumpy and exhausted from not sleeping. He didn't make fun of me for the cleansing ritual. He just held me and told me everything would be okay. That night, I made Mark check under the bed and in the closet before we went to sleep, like I was 5 years old again. I also insisted on leaving the bathroom light on with the door cracked. There was no way I was sleeping in complete darkness. Thankfully, nothing happened that second night, or the third, but the experience has changed me. I still can't sleep without some kind of light on, and I get anxious if Mark has to work late and I'm alone in the house after dark. I've been trying to make sense of what happened. The timing is what gets me. I had just started shadowing at the hospital's sterile processing department a week before this incident. I handled surgical tools from all sorts of procedures, including some emergency surgeries where patients didn't make it. I keep wondering if maybe something followed me home. Could a spirit have attached itself to me because I handled instruments that were used on someone who died? It sounds crazy when I say it out loud, but I can't shake the feeling that there's a connection. One particular day stands out. There had been a trauma case, a car accident victim who didn't survive despite the surgical team's best efforts. I remember processing the tools from that surgery and feeling unusually sad about it, even though I didn't know the patient. The instruments seemed heavier somehow. I know that sounds weird. And that was just 2 days before my experience. I haven't told anyone at the hospital about this. They'd think I was nuts. I'm still doing my shadowing there because I need the experience for my career, but I've started saying a little protection prayer before I handle any instruments now, just in case. Mark thinks it was just a particularly vivid nightmare combined with sleep paralysis. He's probably right. That's the rational explanation. But it doesn't explain why I'm still so affected by it weeks later. It doesn't explain why I still can't sleep on the left side of the bed, or why I get goosebumps every time I think about that presence standing there, watching me. Sometimes I think I catch glimpses of something out of the corner of my eye, but when I turn to look, there's nothing there. My dreams have been strange too, fragmented and unsettling, though nothing as terrifying as that night. I don't know what to do now. I've thought about talking to a medium or someone who knows about this stuff, but part of me is afraid that acknowledging it might make it stronger or bring it back. So I just keep burning cedar once a week, just in case, and I never ever sleep without a light on anymore. I wish I could give this story a neat ending. Tell you that I figured out what it was, or that I'm completely over it now. But the truth is, I'm still scared. I still sleep with the bathroom light on. I still wake up sometimes in the middle of the night with my heart racing, convinced that something is in the room with us. Whatever visited me that night, whether it was a ghost, a figment of my imagination, or something else entirely, it has left its mark on me, and the worst part is not knowing if it will ever come back. Story 10. I never really believed in the supernatural until I had my daughter. I mean, I've always had weird dreams and experiences, but I managed to rationalize them away. That all changed in November when Lily was born. It started about 3 weeks after we brought her home. The first few weeks were that typical new parent blur. Sleep deprivation, constant feeding, wondering if every little thing was normal. We were living in Pineville, in this older house my husband and I had bought the year before. Nothing fancy, just a 3-bedroom with character, as the realtor had put it. Looking back, maybe character was code for something else. The dreams began gradually. At first, I'd see my dad, who passed away 5 years ago. These weren't scary. He'd just be sitting in our old living room or working in his garden like he used to. He never acknowledged me, though, which was strange. I'd call out to him, but he'd continue whatever he was doing, as if I wasn't there. I mentioned these dreams to my husband, who just said it was probably because I wished my dad could have met Lily. Then the dreams shifted. I started having these terrifying visions where I'd be holding Lily one moment and the next, something unseen would be trying to take her from my arms. I couldn't see what it was, just felt this overwhelming presence and the sensation of her being pulled away. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, immediately checking her bassinet to make sure she was still there. About a month after Lily was born, I had the most disturbing dream yet. I was in our bedroom when I heard water running in the bathroom. I went to check, and there was this figure, translucent but clearly visible, standing by the sink. It looked like an old woman, but her features were blurry. I wasn't exactly scared, just confused. The figure seemed to be trying to get my attention, gesturing toward the mirror. I stood there watching her for what felt like minutes. When I finally turned back to check on Lily, my blood ran cold. There were 3 identical babies in her crib, all of them Lily, all wearing her little yellow onesie with the ducks on it, all looking up at me with her eyes. I ran to the crib and somehow managed to gather all 3 of them in my arms, holding them tightly against my chest, knowing I needed to protect them but not understanding from what. They felt real, warm, breathing, exactly the same weight as my daughter. I woke up shaking, my nightgown soaked through with sweat. Lily was sleeping peacefully in her bassinet, just one of her, thank God. But I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that lingered. Something about those 3 identical babies felt like a warning. Around this same time, Lily started having what seemed like night terrors. She would be sound asleep, then suddenly her little body would go rigid. Her eyes would flutter open, but she wouldn't seem to see anything. Then she'd let out these heart-wrenching squeals. Not her normal cry, but something primal and terrified. The pediatrician said it was normal, that babies have all sorts of weird sleep behaviors, but it didn't feel normal to me. I noticed a pattern. When she slept in my arms, I could see her eyes suddenly roll upward, quickly, like she was trying to look at something above her. Then the squealing would start. Without even thinking about it, I'd whisper, "I'm here, the ghost can't get you." The words just came out automatically, and somehow they seemed to calm her. She'd settle back into sleep, but I'd be left wondering why I'd said ghost specifically. My mom is from South Korea and grew up with traditional shamanic beliefs. When I was pregnant, she warned me not to visit cemeteries, saying something would follow me out. I didn't pay much attention. My mom has always been superstitious, and I'd learned to filter out what I considered her more irrational fears. But now, with Lily's strange behavior and my increasingly vivid dreams, I started to wonder if there was something to her warnings. I've always had these weird, prophetic dreams. Since I was a teenager, I'd dream about events before they happened. Usually mundane things like who would call the next day or what grade I'd get on a test. I've even had what I guess you'd call out-of-body experiences, where I'd feel like I was floating above myself watching me sleep. But I'd always chalked it up to an overactive imagination or some quirk in how my brain processes information during sleep. Now I started worrying that Lily had inherited whatever this sensitivity is. The thought terrified me. I didn't want my daughter to experience the same unsettling feelings I'd grown up with, that constant sense that there was more going on around me than what I could see. Things got even stranger when my mother-in-law came to stay with us for a weekend to help out. Janet has always been the most practical, no-nonsense person I know. She doesn't believe in anything she can't see or touch. But on the second night of her visit, she came downstairs looking pale and shaken. "I saw you last night," she told me over coffee. "You walked right through my bedroom and out the door." I told her I hadn't been upstairs all night. I was in the living room with Lily, trying to get her back to sleep after one of her episodes. Janet insisted, "It was you, Olivia. Same pajamas you're wearing now, same hair. You walked straight through my room, didn't even look at me, and then just walked through the closed door. She tried to laugh it off, saying it must have been sleep paralysis, but she admitted she'd never experienced anything like that before. The way her hands trembled as she held her coffee mug told me how rattled she was. A week later, we visited my mom's house for dinner. We were all sitting in the living room after the meal, Lily asleep in her carrier, when something caught my peripheral vision. A clear figure moving rapidly from the entryway, through the living room, and back into the hallway. I froze, not wanting to scare everyone, but then my mom gasped. "You saw it too?" I asked her. She nodded, her face serious. "It's been happening since you brought the baby last time." My husband and his mother hadn't seen anything, and they exchanged that look people give when they think you're being irrational. But my mom took my hand and led me into the kitchen, away from them. "The baby," she said, lowering her voice. "She has the mark, you know. Lily has this small birthmark on her inner right arm, just a pale brown patch shaped vaguely like a leaf. Nothing unusual, according to the pediatrician. That mark means someone wants to be close to her," my mom continued. "Someone from the other side." I felt a chill run through me. "What do you mean?" "Sometimes when a spirit has a strong connection to a family, they mark the children so they can find them, to protect them." "Protect them from what?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. My mom shook her head. "Not all spirits are good, Olivia. Some are drawn to sensitive people, like you, like your daughter." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what my mom had said, about my strange dreams, about Lily's night terrors. I felt torn between two worlds, the rational one where night terrors are just a normal developmental phase and birthmarks are just melanin, and the world my mother inhabits, where spirits mark children and can follow you home from cemeteries. Around 3 in the morning, I was still awake, watching Lily sleep in her bassinet beside our bed. The house was completely silent except for the occasional creak of the heating system turning on. Then I heard it, soft footsteps in the hallway outside our bedroom. At first I thought it was my husband getting up to use the bathroom, but he was sound asleep beside me. The footsteps stopped right outside our door. I lay there, frozen, listening. The doorknob didn't turn, but I had the distinct impression that someone, or something, was standing there, waiting. Lily suddenly stirred in her sleep, making those same distressed movements I'd seen before. Her eyes fluttered behind closed lids, and her little fists clenched. Without thinking, I got up and placed myself between the door and her bassinet. "You can't have her," I whispered into the darkness. "I won't let you." The air in the room seemed to get heavier, pressing down on me. The temperature dropped noticeably. I could see my breath in front of my face, which made no sense since our heating was on. The digital clock on our bedside table flickered, the numbers jumping randomly. Then, as suddenly as it had started, everything went back to normal. The air lightened, the temperature returned to normal, and Lily settled back into peaceful sleep. But I knew something had been there. I knew it wanted my daughter. The next day, I went online and researched everything I could about protecting infants from spiritual entities. I felt ridiculous. I have a degree in psychology, for God's sake. I understand sleep paralysis and night terrors, and how the mind plays tricks when you're sleep deprived, but none of that rational knowledge could explain what was happening in our house. I ended up buying some sage to burn, something my mom had always done, and I placed small bowls of salt in the corners of Lily's nursery, another of my mom's protections. I felt silly doing it, but also desperate to try anything that might help. That night, as I was putting Lily down, I noticed something on her arm, just below her birthmark. It looked like a small bruise, perfectly circular. I called the pediatrician's after-hours line, worried it might be some kind of infection, but the nurse assured me it was probably nothing to worry about. "Babies bruise easily," she said. But as I was hanging up, I remembered something my mom had once told me about spirits leaving marks. I took a photo of the bruise to show her the next day. When I finally fell asleep that night, I had another dream, the most vivid yet. I was standing in Lily's nursery, but it wasn't really our house. The walls seemed to stretch upward endlessly, and the window looked out onto a landscape I didn't recognize, rolling hills under a purple sky. Lily was in her crib, but she wasn't alone. 3 figures stood around her, tall, indistinct, their features constantly shifting. They weren't touching her, just watching. I wasn't afraid, strangely. I somehow knew they weren't there to harm her. One of them turned toward me, and though I couldn't make out a face, I felt a sense of recognition. It raised what might have been a hand and pointed to the birthmark on Lily's arm, then to itself. "Are you protecting her?" I asked in the dream. The figure nodded, or at least made a motion I interpreted as a nod. From what? The 3 figures moved aside then, revealing a 4th presence in the room. Darker, more substantial somehow, lurking in the corner. Unlike the others, this one filled me with dread. It seemed to be waiting for something, watching for an opportunity. I woke with a start, immediately checking on Lily. She was sleeping peacefully, but the baby monitor on our nightstand was displaying static, the small screen showing nothing but snow. As I watched, 3 distinct shadows passed across the screen, one after another. The next day, I showed my mom the photo of the bruise on Lily's arm. She studied it for a long time, then asked me if I'd been having dreams. When I described the 3 figures around Lily's crib, she nodded as if confirming something she already knew. "They're guardians," she said simply. "They were sent to protect her." "From what?" I asked, echoing my question from the dream. My mom looked uncomfortable. "There are things that are drawn to new life, especially to children with gifts. These guardians are making sure nothing attaches itself to her." I wanted to dismiss it all as superstition, but I couldn't ignore what was happening. That night, I sat beside Lily's crib, watching her sleep. The room felt different, not exactly peaceful, but not threatening either. More like a hospital room where you know serious work is being done. I must have dozed off in the rocking chair because I suddenly jerked awake to the sound of Lily making her distressed noises. But this time, before I could go to her, I saw them. 3 tall, translucent figures standing around her crib, just as in my dream. They weren't touching her, just forming a protective circle. And in the corner of the nursery was that darker shape, watching. One of the figures turned to look at me, or at least I felt its attention shift in my direction. I wasn't afraid. Somehow I knew these beings were connected to us, maybe even family in some way I couldn't understand. I thought of my father, wondering if he was among them. The dark presence in the corner seemed to notice me then. It moved, not walking, but sort of shifting position, closer to the crib. The 3 guardians responded immediately, drawing closer to Lily. The dark shape retreated, then seemed to dissolve into the shadows. Lily settled back into peaceful sleep, and the 3 figures gradually faded from view. But before they disappeared completely, one of them moved toward me. I felt a light touch on my cheek, like the brush of a fingertip, but cold. Then they were gone. I've never told anyone except my mom about what I saw that night. My husband would think I'm losing my mind from sleep deprivation, and I can't really blame him. Sometimes I wonder myself if I imagined the whole thing. But Lily is 6 months old now, and she sleeps through the night without any more terrors. The bruise below her birthmark faded after a few days and never reappeared. Sometimes I still hear footsteps in the hallway at night, and occasionally the baby monitor will display static for no reason, but it doesn't frighten me anymore. I still don't know exactly what was happening during those first few months of Lily's life. Were those entities really protecting her from something dark that wanted to harm her? Was it all just the product of postpartum anxiety and sleep deprivation? I go back and forth, depending on the day and how rational I'm feeling. But one thing I know for sure, whenever I put Lily down to sleep now, I whisper a thank you to whoever might be watching over her, just in case. Story 11. I've been debating whether to share this for weeks now. Part of me feels stupid even typing it out, but I need to tell someone who might understand. I still get chills thinking about it, and I haven't slept right since it happened. This was about 3 weeks ago. It was a Tuesday night, nothing special. I'd had a pretty normal day. Work was busy but manageable. Grabbed takeout on the way home, the usual. I was unwinding in my living room around 10 o'clock, stretched out on my stomach on the couch, watching King of the Hill. It's my go-to comfort show when I just want to zone out. I think it was that episode where Hank gets addicted to a video game. I remember Bobby saying something that made me laugh. I wasn't even particularly tired, just comfortable. My place is small but cozy. The TV is mounted on the wall opposite my couch. There's a coffee table between them with my water bottle and the remote. Nothing fancy, just my regular setup. I must have dozed off during a commercial break without realizing it. What happened next still doesn't make sense to me. I became aware that I was awake, or at least I thought I was. The TV was still on, still playing King of the Hill. I could hear the dialogue clearly. I could see my water bottle on the coffee table, half empty with condensation on the outside. The light from my kitchen was casting the same shadow it always does on the floor. Everything was exactly as it had been before I fell asleep, but I couldn't move. Not a finger, not a toe, nothing except my eyes. At first I thought, okay, this is just sleep paralysis. I've had it before, though rarely. It's scary, but I know it passes. But this felt different somehow. More real. There was this heaviness pressing down on my back, like someone was sitting on me. Not just the usual sleep paralysis pressure, but a distinct weight with shape to it, concentrated right between my shoulder blades. I tried to calm myself down. It'll pass, just breathe, I kept thinking. But then the weight shifted. It moved down my spine deliberately, like someone adjusting their position. That's when the panic really started to set in. This wasn't just the sensation of pressure. Something was physically on top of me. I strained to look at the TV, trying to focus on something normal. The episode was still playing, and I recognized the exact scene. Dale was talking about one of his conspiracy theories. I remember thinking how bizarre it was that my brain could perfectly recreate the episode in this weird, half-dream state. The kitchen light was casting the same pattern on the floor. My phone was on the coffee table, screen down, exactly where I'd left it. Every detail was perfect. And then the worst part happened. I felt something, I don't know what, poking at my rear end. Not in a sexual way, more like something curiously prodding, testing. The sensation was so specific and so real that I completely freaked out internally. I couldn't scream, couldn't move, couldn't do anything except lie there while this unseen thing touched me. The fear was overwhelming. Not the kind of fear you get from watching a horror movie, but primal terror that makes your soul feel like it's trying to escape your body. I've never felt anything like it before or since. My heart was racing so fast I could hear it in my ears. In my head, I started frantically repeating, "You gotta turn over, you gotta turn over, right now," over and over. Like a desperate mantra, I was focusing every ounce of willpower on moving my left arm, which was tucked under my chest. Just move your arm, Jackson. That's all you need to do. Just one movement. The pressure on my back increased, like whatever it was knew I was trying to break free and was trying to stop me. The room seemed to get darker, the edges of my vision blurring. The sounds from the TV became distorted, like they were coming through water. But I could still make out the episode perfectly. It was surreal. I don't know how long this went on. It felt like forever, but was probably only a minute or two. Finally, with what felt like superhuman effort, I managed to move my left arm. It wasn't smooth, it was jerky, like punching through molasses, but I did it. I forced my arm out and used the momentum to twist my body, rolling onto my back. And that's when I saw it. For just a split second before I fully woke up, I saw something. Not clearly, not like I could describe its features, but there was definitely a presence there. It was like a dark blur, but vibrating somehow. The closest thing I can compare it to is that effect in movies when something invisible moves. That shimmery distortion in the air, or like the invisibility cloak in Harry Potter, but darker and less defined. It was just a patch of visual static hovering above me, but it had form, it had intention, and it knew I had seen it. The moment my eyes focused on it, the thing just vanished. Not like it moved away, but like it just ceased to exist in that spot. 1 second it was there, and the next it wasn't. I sat bolt upright, gasping for air like I'd been underwater. My heart was pounding so hard my chest hurt. I was drenched in sweat. The TV was still on. Same episode of King of the Hill. Same scene even. Dale was still talking. My water bottle was still on the table, exactly as I'd seen it during the whatever it was. Everything in the room was exactly as it had appeared in my dream. Nothing was out of place. Nothing was different, except now I was alone. I jumped up and turned on every light in my apartment, checked all the closets, under the bed, behind the shower curtain, anywhere something could hide. Nothing. I even opened the front door and looked down the hallway of my building. Empty. I sat on the edge of my couch for hours, afraid to move, afraid to turn off any lights, afraid to close my eyes. I kept feeling phantom touches on my back, making me jump and look behind me. Nothing was ever there. I've been trying to rationalize it since then. Maybe it was just an unusually vivid episode of sleep paralysis. Maybe the pressure and poking sensations were just my brain misinterpreting normal bodily signals while I was in that half-asleep state. Maybe the entity I saw was just the last fragment of a dream fading as I woke up. But here's what bothers me the most and what I can't explain away: the perfect recreation of reality in my dream. Every single detail of my apartment was accurate. The exact position of my water bottle, the exact scene playing on TV, the exact pattern of light on the floor. How could my sleeping brain perfectly recreate all of that? How could I dream the exact continuation of the TV episode that was playing when I fell asleep, and that feeling of being touched? It was so specific, so localized. Not the general heaviness of sleep paralysis, but deliberate contact. Something was there with me. Something was on top of me. Something was curious about me. I slept at a friend's place for 5 nights after it happened. I told them I had a plumbing issue in my bathroom. I couldn't admit what really happened. They'd think I was losing it. Hell, maybe I am. I'm back in my apartment now, but I've rearranged the furniture. The couch is against a different wall. I bought a nightlight. I leave the TV off. I try not to fall asleep on my stomach, but every night when I'm lying in bed, I swear I can feel the air in my room change just before I drift off. Like something's waiting for me to let my guard down again. Like something's watching, curious to see what I'll do next. Like something wants to continue whatever it was doing to me that night. I don't know what happened to me. I don't know if it was real or if my brain just glitched out in some weird way, but I know how it felt, and I know what I saw, even if it was just for a second. I'm writing this with all the lights on at 3 in the morning because I jolted awake feeling that same pressure on my back. Nothing was there when I turned over, but I'm scared to go back to sleep now. Has anyone else experienced anything like this? Am I just going crazy? I need to know I'm not alone in this. Story 12. I've been debating for months whether to post this. It's not something I talk about with people because, honestly, who would believe me? But I need to get this off my chest, and maybe someone here has experienced something similar. I'm 26 now, but this started when I was around 3 years old. I grew up in a nice house in Chile with my parents. That's where I first met Steve. That's what I call him anyway. I needed to give him a name to make him seem less terrifying. He's not exactly a ghost, at least not in the traditional sense. He's more like a tall, dark figure, completely black, except for these wide-open eyes that glow an eerie green color. Sometimes they look like they're bleeding that same green color down his face. When I was little, I would see him watching me from the hallway while I played with my toys. I should have been terrified, and sometimes I was, but there was always something oddly comforting about his presence. The first time I truly understood Steve was protecting me was when I was about 4. My cousins were over and they were horrible kids. They locked me outside in the backyard after dark as a joke. I was crying and banging on the door, but no one came. That's when I felt it, a cold pressure on my shoulder, like someone putting their hand there. I turned around, and though I couldn't see anything clearly in the dark, I felt someone standing behind me. The fear just melted away. I sat on the back steps feeling strangely calm until my mum finally realized I was missing and let me back in. Later that night, I woke up to get water and saw something staring at me through the glass sliding door in our living room. Those green, glowing eyes, unmistakable against the darkness. When I was 5, my family moved from Chile to a suburb outside Sydney. I remember being worried that I'd leave Steve behind, but he came with us. The weird stuff started almost immediately in the new house. One morning I was brushing my teeth before school, and I looked in the mirror. I was frowning because I didn't want to go to school that day, but my reflection was grinning back at me. Not smiling, grinning, with too many teeth. I dropped my toothbrush and ran out screaming for my mum. She didn't believe me, of course. A few nights later, I woke up needing to pee. When I opened my bedroom door, Steve was standing in the hallway. The night light from the bathroom cast just enough light that I could see his outline, a massive, dark mass against the dim hallway. I froze. He just stood there, those green eyes fixed on me. After what felt like forever, he moved aside, almost like he was letting me pass. I ran back to bed and hid under the covers until morning. The incident that convinced me Steve wasn't just my imagination happened when I was 7. My family was having a picnic at this lagoon near our house. While my parents were setting up food, I wandered off toward the water. I don't remember consciously deciding to walk into the lagoon. It was like I was in a trance. Before I knew what was happening, I was chest deep in water and sinking. I couldn't swim well then, and panic set in as water covered my face. That's when I felt those cold hands again, gripping me under my arms, pulling me up and dragging me back to shore. When I coughed up water and looked around, no one was there. My parents were still dozens of meters away, unaware of what had happened. There were no other people nearby. I was soaking wet, coughing up lagoon water, but alive because something had pulled me out. As I got older, Steve's activities intensified. He'd tap on my bedroom walls at night. Not random tapping, but deliberate patterns. Sometimes I'd tap back and he'd respond with the exact same pattern. I'd hear footsteps in the hallway when my parents were asleep. Doors would open and close by themselves. Once, I heard this low growling sound coming from my closet that sent me running to my parents' room in terror. The most unsettling thing about Steve is his ability to mimic. He can perfectly copy my voice, my mum's voice, my dad's voice. When I was 13, I heard my mum calling me from the kitchen, but when I went downstairs, the house was empty. My parents had gone shopping. Even more disturbing, Steve can sometimes take on our appearances. When I was 15, my mum came into my room looking pale and shaken. She asked if I'd just been standing at the end of the hallway staring at her. I hadn't moved from my bed for hours. She described seeing me standing perfectly still, staring with an odd expression before walking into the bathroom and locking the door. When she knocked, no one answered. When my dad unlocked it with the emergency key, the bathroom was empty. I always wondered if I was just losing my mind until I had a conversation with my grandmother when I was 18. She was visiting from Chile. And one night, after a few glasses of wine, she started talking about the dark man in my parents' first house, the house where I was born. According to her, that house had been newly built, but from the moment my parents moved in, there was something there. My dad would see a tall figure standing in doorways at night. They would hear footsteps when no one was walking. A maid they hired refused to come back after her first day, saying she saw a man with glowing eyes standing in the hallway when she was the only one home. My grandmother even called a priest to cleanse the house. It didn't work. The priest himself supposedly saw something that disturbed him so much he refused to come back. The most shocking part was learning that Steve had been with my family years before I was born. He wasn't attached to me or to a house. He was somehow attached to my family. When I was 20, I went through a really rough period. I was depressed and having suicidal thoughts. One night, I was sitting on the roof of my apartment building, legs dangling over the edge, seriously contemplating jumping. I felt those familiar cold hands on my shoulders, pulling me backward onto the rooftop. I swear I heard a distorted voice say, "Not now." It wasn't in my head, it was right behind me. 6 months later, I nearly walked in front of a bus while texting. Those same cold hands yanked me backward just as the bus rushed past, close enough that I felt the wind from it hit my face. Several witnesses looked shocked, asking if I was okay, but no one seemed to notice what had pulled me back. Just last year, I was driving home late after a night out with friends. I was tired but not drunk. I never drink and drive. On a quiet stretch of road, I must have dozed off for a second because suddenly I was heading straight for a tree. My hands weren't even on the wheel anymore. Right before impact, the steering wheel turned sharply by itself, and I felt that cold pressure on my hands, forcing them back onto the wheel. The car swerved and missed the tree by inches. Steve isn't always helpful though. Sometimes he seems to enjoy scaring me. He'll hide things and put them back in weird places. He'll turn on appliances when I'm home alone. Once, all the cabinets and drawers in my kitchen opened simultaneously while I was making dinner. Another time, my TV turned on by itself at 3 in the morning at maximum volume. Last month, I moved into a new apartment further from my parents' house. The first night, I was unpacking boxes when I heard footsteps in the hallway. I stepped out to look, and there he was, the familiar dark figure, those green eyes staring at me. He had followed me to yet another home. The most recent incident happened just yesterday. I was in the shower when the bathroom suddenly went ice cold. The mirror fogged up despite the cold, and words appeared in the condensation. Always watching. I didn't write that. I was in the shower the whole time. I don't know what Steve is. A ghost? A demon? Some kind of guardian entity? All I know is that he's been with me, with my family, for over 2 decades. He's followed us from Chile to Australia, from house to house. He's terrified me, protected me, saved my life multiple times. Last night, I set up a voice recorder before going to bed. I asked questions into the empty room and left the recorder running. This morning I listened to the playback. Most of it was just silence and my own voice asking questions. But at exactly 3:13 in the morning, there was a response to my question, "What are you?" A distorted, deep voice that made my skin crawl simply said, "Yours." I still don't understand what that means. All I know is that as I'm typing this, I can feel him standing behind me. Those cold hands are resting on my shoulders, and somehow I'm not afraid anymore. Story 13. I still can't explain what happened that night 3 years ago. I've gone over it in my head thousands of times, and I still get goosebumps thinking about it. I was 19, living back at home in Cleveland after dropping out of Youngstown State. College just wasn't for me, you know. I couldn't focus, hated the classes, and was basically wasting my parents' money. The only good thing that came out of that whole college experience was meeting Jenna. We started dating about 6 months before I dropped out, and somehow we managed to keep it going even after I moved back home. She was still at YSU, but she'd visit me on weekends when she could. Instead of staying at my parents' place, we'd usually crash at my older brother Keith's house about 10 minutes away. He had this 3-bedroom place where all his friends would hang out, party, whatever. It was basically the spot where everyone went to blow off steam. Keith called it the party house, but it was really just a regular house with minimal furniture and maximum beer. He had 2 dogs, a pit bull named Chocolate and an American bulldog named Creed. Both were super friendly but energetic as hell, so he'd keep them in the basement when people were over. Anyway, this particular night happened in February. It was freezing outside, like typical Cleveland winter freezing. Jenna had driven up from Youngstown to spend the weekend with me. We were hanging out at Keith's place, just watching movies in the living room. Nothing crazy. Keith had gone out clubbing with some of his friends. The living room had 2 couches facing each other with a coffee table in between. By around midnight, Jenna was knocked out on one of the couches. She had this thing where she could fall asleep anywhere, anytime. I was still up, scrolling through my phone, not really tired yet. Around 2 in the morning, I heard Keith and his crew come stumbling through the front door. They were all clearly wasted, laughing and talking way too loud. Keith had brought back maybe 4 of his buddies and 3 women I'd never seen before. One of them, this girl with long dark hair and these intense eyes, kept looking at me. "This is my little brother, Marcus," Keith announced to everyone, slapping me on the back. I nodded at everyone, trying to be cool, while also motioning for them to quiet down because Jenna was asleep. The dark-haired girl, I think someone called her Vanessa, smiled at me in this way that made me feel, I don't know, important, wanted, something I hadn't felt in a while. Keith grabbed some beers from the fridge and everyone headed upstairs to his room where they'd probably play music and hang out until dawn. I stayed downstairs, sitting there in the dimly lit living room with Jenna asleep across from me. I'm not proud of what happened next. Vanessa came back downstairs saying she needed to use the bathroom. When she came out, she sat next to me on the couch. "Not joining the party upstairs?" she asked, sitting closer than she needed to. "Nah, my girlfriend's asleep," I said, gesturing to Jenna. Vanessa looked over at Jenna, then back at me with this smirk. "She looks pretty out of it. Probably wouldn't even notice if you disappeared for a bit." I knew what she was suggesting, and God help me, I considered it. Things with Jenna had been complicated. The long-distance thing was harder than we expected. We'd been fighting a lot, and here was this attractive girl clearly interested in me. "Maybe just for a few minutes," I said. I followed Vanessa upstairs, my heart pounding. We passed Keith's room, where everyone was laughing and playing some drinking game, and went to the spare bedroom at the end of the hall. As soon as the door closed behind us, I felt this wave of guilt crash over me. What the hell was I doing? Vanessa must have seen it on my face because she stepped back, crossing her arms. "You actually have a girlfriend downstairs and you're up here with me?" she said, her tone completely changed. "That's so disrespectful." I wasn't thinking," I stammered. "Clearly," she said, shaking her head. "I'm not into this anymore. You should go back downstairs." I felt like complete garbage as I walked back downstairs. The shame was overwhelming. I couldn't even look at Jenna sleeping peacefully on the couch. What kind of person was I becoming? I couldn't bring myself to join Jenna on her couch. I didn't deserve to be near her. Instead, I took the other couch, the one I'd been sitting on earlier, closest to the entrance of the living room. I draped my arm over my head, pulled a blanket over my face, and tried to disappear into my shame. It must have been around 3 in the morning when I started drifting off to sleep. The party upstairs had quieted down. I could hear the faint thump of music and occasional laughter. As I was falling asleep, I heard what sounded like claws clicking on the hardwood floor. Chocolate must have escaped from the basement again, I thought. That dog was an escape artist, always finding ways to get past the basement door. I was just about to completely fall asleep when it happened. It started with this heavy feeling pressing down on me. I couldn't move. Not my arms, not my legs, nothing. Just my eyes. I could blink and look around, but that was it. Sleep paralysis, I thought. I'd experienced it once before in high school. Then I felt something climb onto the couch by my feet, something heavy. In my half-asleep state, I assumed it was Chocolate jumping up to sleep at my feet like he sometimes did. But then I felt whatever it was slowly crawl up my body. It didn't feel like a dog anymore. It felt, I don't know how to describe it, deliberate, intentional. I tried to move, to see what it was, but I couldn't. The paralysis had me completely locked in place. My arm was still draped over my head from when I'd fallen asleep, and my hand was hanging over the arm of the couch. That's when I felt it. Teeth, slowly sinking into the flesh of my hand. The pain was unlike anything I'd ever felt before. It wasn't just the physical sharpness of teeth breaking skin. It was purposeful, like whatever was biting me wanted me to feel every second of it. The teeth pressed deeper, not in a quick bite, but in a slow, excruciating pressure that seemed to last forever. I was screaming in my head, but couldn't make a sound. I could only stare at the ceiling, feeling those teeth in my hand, wondering if they would bite straight through, and then, as suddenly as it started, the paralysis broke. I tumbled off the couch onto the floor, gasping for air. I scrambled to my feet, flipping on the light switch next to the couch. The living room was empty except for Jenna, still sound asleep on the other couch. There was no dog, no anything. I looked at my hand, expecting to see blood, puncture wounds, something, but there was nothing, not a mark. The pain was completely gone too. I stood there breathing hard, trying to make sense of what just happened. Had I dreamed it? It felt too real to be a dream. The pain was too specific, too intense. I went to the basement door and checked. It was still firmly shut. I opened it cautiously and peered down the stairs. Both Chocolate and Creed were down there, looking up at me curiously from their beds. There's no way either of them could have gotten out, bitten me, and gotten back in with the door still closed. I checked the rest of the house. Keith and his friends were all passed out in various rooms upstairs. No one was awake. Nothing was out of place. I spent the rest of that night wide awake, sitting in a chair across from both couches, trying to process what had happened. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow seemed to move. When morning came, I examined my hand in the daylight. Still nothing. No marks, no soreness, nothing to suggest anything had bitten me, but I could still feel those teeth, the deliberate pressure, the pain that felt like a message. I never told Jenna what happened that night, or about how close I came to cheating on her. We broke up a few months later for completely different reasons. The long distance was too much, and we were heading in different directions with our lives. But I never forgot that night. I never forgot the feeling of those teeth in my hand, and I never ever considered being unfaithful again. Sometimes I wonder if it was just my guilt manifesting in some bizarre sleep paralysis episode. Other times, I'm convinced something supernatural happened that night. Something knew what I was about to do and stopped me, warned me. I've researched sleep paralysis extensively since then. I know about the hallucinations, the feeling of pressure on your chest, the sense that something evil is in the room with you, but none of the articles or forums I've read mentioned anything about feeling teeth slowly biting into your flesh with such intention. Whatever it was that bit me that night, I think it changed the course of my life. And sometimes, late at night when I'm alone, I still catch myself tucking my hands under the blankets just in case. Story 14. I've never really believed in haunted objects until what happened to me when I was 16. Even now, typing this makes me feel anxious, like I'm somehow inviting that energy back into my life. But after reading so many accounts on here, I figured it might help to share my own experience. I grew up in a small ranch-style house in Pineville with my mom and stepdad. My stepdad worked as a mover, which meant he sometimes came home with random stuff people didn't want anymore. Usually it was nothing special. Old lamps, chairs nobody wanted, that kind of thing. But this one time in the summer before my junior year, he brought home this painting of Marilyn Monroe. It wasn't like a regular poster or print. This was hand-painted on canvas, really colorful and vibrant. Marilyn's face was done in these bright pinks and blues instead of normal skin tones. It was kind of pop art style, I guess. My stepdad said some lady had given it to him after they finished moving her stuff because she didn't have room for it anymore. He thought I might like it for my room. The moment my mom saw it, she got this weird look on her face. She just said, "I don't like it," but wouldn't explain why. It was strange, because my mom isn't usually the type to reject stuff without giving a reason, but I had already seen it and thought it looked cool, so she reluctantly let me keep it. I remember her saying something like, "Fine, but don't come crying to me when you get sick of it." Looking back, I wonder if she sensed something about it that I couldn't. My bedroom was at the far end of our house. Our place had this long hallway with bedrooms branching off, and mine was the last one. I hung the painting above my bed that same evening. It looked awesome. The colors really brightened up my otherwise boring room with its beige walls. That first night was when everything started. I fell asleep easily enough, but then had the most intense nightmare I've ever experienced. In the dream, I was lying in my bed, in my room, everything exactly as it was in real life, when suddenly the floor beneath my bed started to give way. It wasn't like it was breaking, more like my bed was sinking like quicksand. I couldn't move or scream as my bed slowly descended through the floor into the basement below. Our basement was unfinished and creepy, even in daylight. Just concrete floors, exposed beams, and a single hanging bulb that you had to pull a string to turn on. In my dream, it was pitch black down there. I could feel the cold basement air on my skin as my bed settled on the concrete floor. I knew something was in there with me. I couldn't see it, but I could sense it moving around in the darkness. I finally managed to break free from whatever was holding me down and jumped off the bed. The basement stairs were all the way on the other side of the house, so I had to run the entire length of the basement to reach them. As I ran, I could hear something skittering behind me, its nails clicking on the concrete. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, I looked back. There was just enough light coming from the crack under the basement door at the top of the stairs to see a small black creature. It wasn't human, more like a twisted, hunched thing about the size of a child. Just as it lunged toward me, I woke up. I was gasping for breath, literally struggling to fill my lungs. My shirt was soaked with sweat and my heart was pounding so hard it actually hurt. It took me a good 15 minutes to calm down enough to convince myself it was just a nightmare. I remember looking up at the Marilyn painting in the dim light from my window, and for a split second I swear her expression looked different, like she was smirking at me. I chalked it up to the shadows and my imagination being in overdrive after that nightmare. I eventually fell back asleep, but had 2 more terrible dreams that night. I don't remember the details of those as clearly, but I know they left me feeling the same, terrified and unable to breathe properly. The next morning, I felt exhausted. My mom asked if I was feeling sick because I looked terrible. I just told her I hadn't slept well. I didn't mention the nightmares because, honestly, it seemed stupid. I was 16, not 6, too old to be scared by bad dreams. That night, it happened again. Same dream about falling through the floor into the basement, same creature chasing me. 2 more nightmares after that. By morning, I was a wreck. I spent the whole day feeling like I was in a fog, jumping at small noises. The 3rd night was the worst. In addition to the basement dream, I had one where I was trapped in my room while something scratched at my door, slowly splintering the wood. The scratching got louder and louder until the door finally burst open, but I woke up before I could see what was on the other side. Again, I woke up drenched in sweat, my chest tight like someone was sitting on it. By this point, I was seriously sleep-deprived and starting to get desperate. I'd never had recurring nightmares like this before. The only thing that had changed in my life was the painting. It seemed ridiculous that a painting could cause nightmares, but I was willing to try anything. That morning, I asked my mom if we could move the painting out of my room for a night, just to test a theory. She gave me this look like she wasn't surprised. "You're having bad dreams, aren't you?" she asked. I was shocked she'd guessed. When I admitted I was, she nodded like she'd been expecting it. I suggested we put the painting in her and my stepdad's room for just one night. If nothing happened, I'd take it back and admit it was all in my head. She thought it was silly but agreed to the experiment. My stepdad was away on an overnight job, so it was just her in their room that night. We moved the painting and leaned it against the wall on her side of the bed. I remember feeling instantly relieved when it was out of my room, like I could breathe easier. That night, I slept deeply, without a single nightmare. The next morning, my mom was in the kitchen when I got up, already on her 2nd cup of coffee. She looked as bad as I had the previous days. Without me even asking, she said, "That painting is going back outside today." She told me she'd had 3 horrible dreams. The worst one involved a box of sickly kittens with crusted eyes and flies covering them. In the dream, she said she felt this overwhelming sense of dread, like the kittens were somehow her fault and something terrible was going to happen to her because of them. She'd woken up feeling like she couldn't breathe, exactly like I had. We didn't even talk about whether it was a coincidence. We both knew it wasn't. My mom grabbed the painting immediately, not even waiting for me to help. She took it straight out to her car and put it in the trunk. She said she didn't even want it in the house for another minute. I slept perfectly that night. No nightmares, no waking up gasping for air. It was like the past 3 nights had never happened, except that I was still exhausted from the lack of sleep. My mom didn't take the painting to the dump right away like I thought she would. When I asked her about it a couple days later, she seemed uncomfortable and admitted she'd been procrastinating. "I don't like having it in my car either," she said. "It feels like it's watching me when I drive." About a week later, she finally told me she'd gotten rid of it. She hadn't taken it to the dump after all. Instead, she'd driven to a neighborhood across town and left it at the end of someone's driveway on trash day. Part of me felt bad for whoever might have picked it up, but mostly I was just relieved it was gone. It's been over 12 years since then, and I've never experienced anything like those nightmares again. My mom and I have talked about it a few times over the years. She admitted she'd felt uneasy about the painting the moment she saw it, but couldn't explain why. She said there was just something wrong with it. The most disturbing part is that I still occasionally have flashes of that basement dream. Not the full nightmare, just brief images. The black creature at the bottom of the stairs, illuminated by that sliver of light. Sometimes when I'm falling asleep, I'll suddenly jerk awake with the feeling that my bed is starting to sink. I've tried researching if paintings can be haunted or cursed, but most of what I find seems like made-up stories. Our experience was real, though. Sometimes I wonder if that painting is still out there somewhere, hanging above someone else's bed, giving them the same terrible dreams. Or maybe it ended up in the landfill where it belonged. Whatever energy was attached to that painting, I hope I never encounter anything like it again. I can deal with ghosts or strange noises. At least you can leave a haunted place. But having something evil hanging right above where you sleep, invading your dreams, that's a different kind of terror. Story 15. I still can't sleep with the windows open. It's been 23 years, and I still wake up in cold sweats when I hear branches snap outside my house. I'm 33 now, but part of me is forever that 10-year-old girl frozen in place, watching something that shouldn't exist beckoning me into the darkness. I spent every other weekend and most summers at my grandmother's cabin when I was growing up. My parents had an ugly divorce, and Grandma Ellie was my safe haven. Her cabin was way off the beaten path. We're talking seriously remote, about 40 minutes from the nearest real town in northern Michigan. No electricity except what her small generator provided. No running water, just a well pump and an outhouse that sat about 100 yards from the main cabin. I loved that place during the day. The woods were my playground, the creek my personal swimming pool. But night at Grandma's cabin was different. The darkness there wasn't like city darkness. It was absolute, the kind where you literally cannot see your hand in front of your face without a flashlight. The night it happened was in late October. I remember because the trees were nearly bare, which made the woods even creepier than usual. Grandma had one strict rule: never go to the outhouse alone after dark. Always wake her up no matter what time it was. She'd get up, grab the big flashlight, not the dinky ones, but the heavy metal one that doubled as a weapon, and walk me out there. But that night, I woke up around 2 in the morning, absolutely bursting to pee. I lay there for a few minutes trying to hold it, but it was getting painful. I could hear Grandma snoring in her room. She'd been up late canning applesauce, and I knew how exhausted she was. I convinced myself I could handle the trip alone. I was 10, after all, not a baby. I grabbed the smaller flashlight from the kitchen drawer and slipped out the back door as quietly as I could. The moment the door closed behind me, I regretted my decision. The woods seemed to close in around the cabin, and the trees looked like bony fingers reaching for the sky. The beam of my flashlight seemed pathetically small against all that darkness. But I really had to go, so I started walking the path to the outhouse. It was worn from years of use, winding between massive pines and maples. During the day, it was a quick walk. At night, it felt like miles. I was about halfway there when I heard it, a branch snapping off to my right. I froze mid-step. My grandma had warned me about mountain lions. They weren't common, but they weren't unheard of either. My heart started hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. Another snap, closer this time. I swung my flashlight toward the sound, my hand shaking so badly the beam bounced wildly through the trees. When I finally steadied it, I wish to God I hadn't. There was a person standing there. At least it had the general shape of a person, but everything about it was wrong. It stood maybe 15 feet away, half hidden behind a thick pine tree. Its posture was all wrong, legs planted wide apart like it was bracing against something, but its upper body hunched forward. Its head was tilted at an angle that no living person's neck could manage, almost completely sideways, ear nearly touching shoulder. And its face. The face is what still haunts me. It was smiling, but not like a normal smile. This was stretched too wide, showing too many teeth. The eyes were open too far, bulging, focused directly on me. In the dim light of my flashlight, the skin looked grayish, almost like clay. We stared at each other for what felt like forever, but was probably only seconds. Then it moved, its arm raised, slowly, jerkily, like a marionette being controlled by an unskilled puppeteer. The hand curled inward, then outward, a beckoning gesture. Come here, come to me. As it beckoned, its smile grew even wider, which shouldn't have been physically possible, and its head tilted further until I was sure its neck must be broken. I couldn't move, I couldn't breathe, I couldn't even scream. I just stood there, my bladder forgotten, as this thing beckoned to me like I was a pet it was calling over. The beckoning got faster, more insistent. The head tilted even more, and I swear I heard something crack. The thing took a step toward me, its body moving in sections, not as a whole. First the leg shifting, then the hip, then the torso rotating separately, like its joints weren't connected properly. That broke my paralysis. I turned and ran, dropping the flashlight in my panic. I didn't care about the darkness anymore. The darkness was safer than what waited in the light. I sprinted back toward the cabin, branches whipping my face, roots trying to trip me. I could hear movement behind me, not running, but a dragging, shuffling sound that somehow kept pace. I hit the cabin door with my full body weight, fumbling with the handle, screaming now. "Grandma! Grandma!" The door flew open, and I fell inside, scrambling backward on the floor, trying to get away from the open door and what might come through it. Grandma rushed out of her bedroom in her nightgown, her gray hair wild around her face. "Lily, what on earth?" "There's something out there," I sobbed, pointing at the open door. "A man, but not a man. His neck is broken and he was calling me to him." I expected her to tell me it was my imagination or maybe grab the shotgun she kept by her bed. What I didn't expect was the look of weary recognition that crossed her face. She walked slowly to the doorway and looked out into the darkness. My flashlight was still on where I'd dropped it, the beam pointing back toward the cabin, and there, at the edge of the light, was the crooked man, still beckoning, still grinning, head hanging at that impossible angle. Grandma sighed heavily, not scared, annoyed. She stepped out onto the porch, and I screamed for her to come back. "I told you to leave," she said firmly, her voice carrying in the night air, not shouting but strong and clear. "You're not welcome here. Scaring my granddaughter is my last straw. Leave before I make you leave." The thing stopped beckoning. Its arm lowered slowly, but the smile remained, the head still tilted. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Grandma turned, came back inside, and locked the door. She pulled the curtains over the windows and lit a kerosene lamp. "Grandma," I whispered, still huddled on the floor. "What was that?" She sat down in her rocking chair and patted the space next to her. I scrambled over and pressed against her side, shaking uncontrollably. "That was Martin Kellerman," she said simply. "Or what's left of him." "What? What's wrong with him?" Grandma stroked my hair. "He hanged himself from the big oak by the creek about 5 years before you were born. His wife had left him, and he couldn't cope." I stared at her in horror. "But he's still out there. How can he be out there if he's dead?" "Some people choose to leave this world but then can't move on," she said. "They're stuck where they ended their lives. Martin's been wandering these woods ever since. Usually he keeps his distance from the cabin, but lately he's been getting bolder." "Why does he look like that?" I whispered. "Because that's how he died, honey. Neck broken from the rope, face frozen in that last moment." She sighed again. "I've told him to move on, but he either can't or won't. Tonight was the last straw, though, scaring a child like that." I couldn't wrap my head around it. My practical, no-nonsense grandmother talking about the dead man in the woods like he was just an annoying neighbor. Are you sure he won't come in?" I asked, eyeing the locked door. He can't, she said firmly. That's one rule they can't break. They can't enter a home unless invited, and nobody in this house is going to invite him in. We sat up the rest of the night, Grandma rocking me and humming softly. Eventually, I fell into an exhausted sleep against her shoulder. In the morning, I was afraid to go outside, but Grandma insisted we go retrieve my flashlight. In the daylight, the path didn't seem so long or frightening. We found the flashlight where I'd dropped it, its battery dead. There, Grandma said, picking it up. Nothing to be afraid of in the daylight. But as we turned to head back, I noticed something on a nearby tree. 3 long scratches in the bark, fresh enough that sap still oozed from them. They were at the height of a man's hand. Grandma saw them too, her mouth set in a grim line. Come on, Lily, back to the cabin. That afternoon, she did something I'd never seen before. She walked the perimeter of her property, sprinkling something from a mason jar and muttering under her breath. When I asked what she was doing, she just said she was refreshing the boundaries. I never saw the crooked man again, though sometimes at night I'd hear branches snapping just beyond the tree line. Grandma would hear them too and would mutter, "Stay where you belong, Martin." A few years later, Grandma had a stroke and had to move to an assisted living facility closer to town. The cabin was sold. I've often wondered if the new owners have seen him, that crooked figure with the broken neck and the beckoning hand. Part of me hopes they haven't. Part of me hopes that whatever Grandma did that day finally helped Martin move on. But when I hear branches snapping outside my window at night, I still freeze, just like I did back then, and I never ever look outside to see what might be beckoning in the darkness. Story 16. I don't talk about this much, but I need to get it off my chest. It's been years now, but I still think about it regularly. I still get chills. I still question what I saw. This happened back when I was in high school, probably around sophomore year. My best friend Jake and I had been tight since the end of middle school. We met in 8th grade when I moved to Lakewood, and he was pretty much the only person who made an effort to talk to me. We clicked right away. Jake lived with his mom and younger brother Ethan. Their mom worked night shifts at the hospital as a nurse, so she was rarely home in the evenings. This meant we had the place to ourselves most nights, which was perfect for typical teenage stuff. Video games, watching movies, eating junk food, and just hanging out. I practically lived at their house on weekends. Jake's mom was cool with it since she knew I was a decent kid and probably felt better knowing her sons weren't alone all night. I got along really well with Ethan too, even though he was a year younger. He would usually hang out with us until he got tired or we started playing games he wasn't into. Their house was nothing special, just a regular 2-story home in a quiet neighborhood. The only notable thing about it was its location. It was literally across the street from Lakewood Cemetery. You could see the gravestones from their front windows. At first, I thought that was creepy as hell, but like anything else, you get used to it after a while. From almost the beginning, we all felt like there was something off about the house. Nothing major or threatening, just little things. We'd hear bumps and creaks at night that didn't make sense. Sometimes it sounded like footsteps coming up the stairs when nobody was there. Their dog would occasionally stare at empty corners and growl. But we were teenagers, so after the initial freakouts, we mostly joked about it. "That's just the ghost," we'd say whenever something weird happened. Over time, we grew less and less frightened by these occurrences. They became background noise, just part of hanging out at Jake's place. His mom never mentioned experiencing anything strange, but she was barely home at night, which is when most of the weird stuff happened. But there was one night, one specific night, that changed everything for me. It was a Friday in October. The weather had just started to get cold, and it was getting dark earlier. Jake and I had planned a gaming marathon since his mom was working a double shift and wouldn't be home until morning. Ethan had been hanging out with us for most of the evening, but around 10 o'clock he said he was tired and headed to bed. This wasn't unusual. He was typically in bed before us on weekends. Jake and I continued our game session. We were playing some first-person shooter, talking trash to each other, completely absorbed in what we were doing. I remember it was around midnight when we finally decided to call it quits. We were both exhausted and agreed to crash in the living room. Their living room had this big L-shaped couch that was perfect for gaming but also good for sleeping on. We'd done this countless times before. We started arranging the cushions to make them more comfortable for sleeping when I heard it. A distinct creak from the hallway floor, followed by this weird moaning sound. It wasn't loud, more like someone groggily sighing. I glanced toward the noise without thinking much of it. That's when I saw Ethan walking across the hallway toward the bathroom. He was shuffling along in his usual blue pajamas, head down, moving slowly like he was half asleep. I remember thinking he must have gotten up to use the bathroom. "Ethan's up," I said to Jake, who had his back turned as he was fixing his makeshift bed on the couch. Jake mumbled something like, "He probably needs to pee," and continued what he was doing. I kept watching Ethan, not breaking my line of sight. This is important. I never looked away. He walked to the bathroom door and then nothing. No door closing, no light turning on. He just sort of disappeared into the darkness of the hallway. Something about it felt wrong, but I couldn't immediately place why. Maybe he changed his mind. Maybe he was sleepwalking. "I'm gonna check on your brother," I told Jake, getting up from the couch. I walked down the hallway to the bathroom. The door was open and it was dark inside. "No, Ethan. Ethan?" I called out, not too loudly. No answer. That's when I heard shuffling coming from his bedroom. I froze. I had just seen him walk toward the bathroom. He couldn't be in his room. I had been watching him the entire time. My heart started racing as I approached Ethan's bedroom. The door was partially open, and I could see a sliver of his room illuminated by his small night light. I pushed the door open wider. There was Ethan in his bed, turning over in his sleep. He was wearing the exact same blue pajamas I had just seen him in, but he was clearly in bed, and from the looks of it, had been there the whole time. My blood went cold. I stood there, unable to move, trying to process what I was seeing. I had just watched Ethan walk down the hallway. I had seen him clearly. I hadn't looked away. There was no way he could have doubled back to his room without me noticing. But there he was, in his bed, dead asleep. I backed out of the room slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. When I returned to the living room, Jake must have seen the look on my face. "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost," he said, and then immediately regretted his choice of words. "Is Ethan okay?" I sat down heavily on the couch. "Jake, I just saw Ethan walking to the bathroom." "Okay, so what?" "But he's asleep in his room. He's been in bed the whole time." Jake stared at me for a second before laughing nervously. "You're messing with me." "I'm not," I insisted. "I swear to God I watched him walk down the hallway to the bathroom. I never took my eyes off him, but he's in his room, asleep in his bed right now." Jake's smile faded. He could tell I wasn't joking. "Maybe you saw wrong, or maybe he went back to his room super quick." "No," I said firmly. "Whatever I saw, it wasn't Ethan, or it wasn't, I don't know. But he's been in his room this whole time." Jake got up and went to check for himself. When he came back, his face was pale. He's completely passed out, like deeply asleep. There's no way he was just up. We sat in silence for a few minutes, both of us trying to rationalize what had happened, but there was no rational explanation. I knew what I had seen. "Let's wake him up and ask if he got up," Jake suggested. I shook my head. "No. I don't want to freak him out. And what if he says he hasn't been up? Then what?" Jake couldn't argue with that logic. The thought of confirming that whatever I'd seen wasn't Ethan was too terrifying to contemplate. We tried to brush it off and go to sleep, but neither of us could. We left all the lights on in the living room and just sat there, talking about anything else, trying to distract ourselves. Every creak and groan of the house made us jump. Around 3 in the morning, we heard footsteps upstairs, clear, deliberate footsteps walking back and forth. Jake's mom wasn't home, and the only upstairs rooms were her bedroom and a storage space. No one should have been up there. We both stared at the ceiling, tracking the sound as it moved across the floor above us. Then it stopped, directly over where we were sitting. "Should we check it out?" Jake whispered. "Hell no," I responded immediately. The footsteps started again, this time moving toward the stairs. We heard the distinct sound of the top stair creaking, a sound we both recognized from countless times going up and down those stairs. Jake grabbed a baseball bat that was leaning against the wall. I picked up the heaviest thing within reach, a table lamp. We both stared at the staircase, waiting. But nothing came down. The house went completely silent. After what felt like an eternity, Jake crept to the bottom of the stairs and looked up. Nothing. We didn't sleep at all that night. We just sat there, wide awake, jumping at every sound until the sun came up. When Ethan woke up and came into the living room around 8 in the morning, he found us still sitting there, exhausted and freaked out. "What's wrong with you guys?" he asked, completely normal, completely himself. We asked him if he'd gotten up during the night. He said no, he'd slept straight through. We believed him. He had no reason to lie, and he seemed genuinely confused by our questions. That was the worst of it, but not the end. Over the next few months, the activity in the house increased. Things would move when no one was looking. We'd hear voices whispering when we were alone. The footsteps became more frequent, but nothing ever compared to that night when I saw, whatever it was, that looked exactly like Ethan. The perfect copy walking down that hallway. Jake's family moved away before senior year started, and I haven't been back to that house since. I've tried to convince myself that I was tired, that my eyes played tricks on me. But I know what I saw. I never broke my line of sight. There was no way Ethan could have been in two places at once. I don't know what it was that I saw that night. A ghost? A doppelganger? Something else entirely? All I know is that something in that house could look like people it wasn't, and that terrifies me more than any bumps in the night ever could. Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night, thinking I hear footsteps in my hallway, and for a split second, I'm afraid to look, because what if I see myself walking down the hall? Story 17. I still don't know how to explain what happened in my apartment. It's been 3 weeks, and I'm still sleeping with the lights on. My friends think I'm being dramatic, but they weren't there. They didn't see what I saw. My apartment in Pinecrest Village isn't anything special, just an old 2-bedroom that's been in my family forever. My great-grandparents bought it back in the 50s, then my grandparents lived here, then my parents, and now me. I never thought twice about it growing up. It was just home. The first time I noticed something wasn't right was when I was 10. I remember because it was right after my birthday. I'd wake up in the middle of the night to the sound of stuff falling in the kitchen, like someone was rummaging through the cabinets. My parents would check, but there was never anything out of place. They said it was just the building settling or the neighbors making noise. I believed them because, well, what else could it be? Then there were the sounds from the balcony, like someone walking back and forth, dragging something heavy. My bedroom window faced the balcony, and I'd lie there frozen, staring at the curtains, terrified that they'd part, and I'd see someone, or something, looking back at me. After a few months, it all just stopped. Life went back to normal, and I eventually convinced myself that I'd imagined the whole thing. Kids have active imaginations, right? Fast forward 15 years. I moved back in after college when my parents decided to retire to Florida. The apartment had been renovated a couple times over the years, but it still had that same familiar feel. For the first few months, everything was fine, normal, quiet. Then last month, it started again. It was subtle at first. I'd put my hairbrush on the bathroom counter, turn away for a second, and when I looked back, it would be on the floor behind me. I thought maybe I'd knocked it over without realizing, but then it happened with my hairspray, not once, but twice. The second time, it didn't just fall, it rolled violently across my hallway carpet. Anyone who's ever dropped something on thick carpet knows things don't roll like that. They stop. This didn't stop until it hit the wall on the other side. I started hearing footsteps at night. Not the creaky floorboard kind that old buildings make, but deliberate steps. They'd start at my bedroom door and slowly approach my bed. I'd lie there, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst through my chest, my eyes squeezed shut because I was too terrified to look. One night I finally worked up the courage to turn on my lamp, and the steps immediately stopped. The room was empty. Things started falling off shelves that had been stable for years. A framed photo of my parents that had sat on the same shelf for a decade suddenly crashed to the floor in the middle of the night. My coffee mug, placed well away from the edge of the kitchen counter, somehow ended up shattered on the tile. But the worst was the breathing. I woke up one morning to the sound of someone breathing right in my ear. Not just any breathing, the kind of heavy, raspy breath that makes your skin crawl. I could feel the warmth of it on my skin. I jumped out of bed so fast I nearly gave myself whiplash, but there was no one there, just my empty room, morning sunlight streaming through the blinds like nothing had happened. I tried to rationalize it all. Maybe the apartment had developed some weird air current issues. Maybe my upstairs neighbor had changed their routine and was walking around more. Maybe I was just stressed from work and imagining things. I even had my friend Mark, who's an engineering student, come over to check if there was anything structurally wrong with the place. He didn't find anything. Then came spring break. I'd taken the week off work to catch up on sleep and binge some shows. Big mistake. Whatever was happening in my apartment seemed to take that as an invitation to ramp things up. On the third night of my break, I woke up at 3:25 in the morning. I know the exact time because I checked my phone, thinking maybe it was almost morning and I could just get up for the day. No such luck. The apartment was pitch black, that deep, heavy darkness that seems to swallow everything. And in that darkness, I heard it. The unmistakable sound of forks clattering against plates in the kitchen. It wasn't subtle. It sounded exactly like someone was setting the table for dinner, metal scraping against ceramic. My first thought was that someone had broken in, but who breaks into an apartment to use the dishes? I lay there for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, trying to convince myself to get up and check. Finally, I grabbed my phone for its flashlight and crept down the hallway toward the kitchen. The sound continued until I was about 5 feet away, then abruptly stopped. The kitchen was empty. All the dishes were exactly where they should be. Plates stacked neatly in the cabinet, silverware in the drawer, nothing out of place. I checked all the doors and windows. Everything was locked from the inside. I was alone in the apartment, or at least I was supposed to be. I went back to bed, pulling the covers up to my chin like a little kid. Just as I was starting to think I'd imagined the whole thing, it started again. Clink, scrape, clink. Louder this time, like whatever was making the noise wanted to make sure I heard it. This time I didn't get up. I put my pillow over my head and eventually fell into a restless sleep. When morning came, I convinced myself it had all been a dream, a very vivid, terrifying dream. The next night proved me wrong. I was in my room around 9:30, watching a movie on my laptop. Not a horror movie, thank God. Some dumb comedy that I wasn't really paying attention to. My cat, Luna, was curled up at the foot of my bed, dead asleep as usual. Then I heard it. A chair in the kitchen scraping against the floor, not just shifting slightly, but the loud, jarring sound of wooden legs dragging across tile. Luna's head shot up, her eyes wide, ears flattened against her head. Before I could react, she bolted from the bed and ran straight toward me, diving under the covers and pressing herself against my legs, trembling. Luna is not a scaredy cat. She's the kind of cat that chases off neighborhood dogs twice her size. I've never seen her scared of anything, but whatever was in my kitchen had terrified her. I sat frozen, staring at my open bedroom door that led to the dimly lit hallway. The only light came from my bedside lamp and the glow of my laptop screen. The rest of the apartment was dark. I hadn't bothered turning on lights since I'd been in my room all evening. That's when I saw it. A shadow moved past my doorway, heading toward the kitchen. But it wasn't just a shadow cast by something else. It was solid, with definition. It was small, about the size of a 6-year-old child. And it wasn't just a blob of darkness. I could make out arms and legs. It moved quickly but deliberately, like it knew exactly where it was going. I couldn't scream. I couldn't move. I just sat there, clutching my terrified cat, watching as this thing ran past my room and into the kitchen. A moment later, I heard another chair move. Then the sound of cabinet doors opening and closing. Something in me snapped then. I don't know if it was anger or just pure adrenaline, but I suddenly found myself on my feet. I marched to my doorway, flipped on the hallway light and shouted, "Who's there? What do you want?" Silence. Complete silence. I stood there for what felt like forever, my heart hammering, sweat trickling down my back. Luna was still hiding under my covers, making these little whimpering sounds I'd never heard from her before. Finally, I worked up the courage to check the kitchen. I turned on every light as I went, half expecting to find someone or something standing there waiting for me. But the kitchen was empty. The chairs were all pushed in neatly at the table. The cabinets were closed. Everything looked normal, except one thing. On the kitchen table was a fork, placed neatly in the center like someone had set it there deliberately. I know it hadn't been there earlier. I'd cleaned the kitchen after dinner and wiped down the table. There was nothing on it when I went to my room. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my living room with all the lights on. Luna curled in my lap, still trembling occasionally. I researched everything I could about hauntings, shadow people, anything that might explain what I'd seen. Most of it seemed like nonsense, but some stories were eerily similar to my experience. The next day, I called my mom and tried to casually ask if anything weird had ever happened in the apartment when they lived here. She laughed it off at first, but then got quiet. She said when I was about 10, I used to talk about a little friend who would play in my room at night. I have zero memory of this. She said they thought it was just an imaginary friend, but sometimes they'd hear me laughing and talking in my room when I was supposed to be asleep. When they'd check on me, I'd be alone, insisting my friend was hiding because grown-ups weren't allowed to see him. I've been staying at a friend's place since that night, but I can't avoid my apartment forever. My lease isn't up for another 8 months and I can't afford to break it. Plus, all my stuff is there. My life is there. What keeps me up at night isn't just the memory of what I saw. It's the questions. Is this thing attached to me or to the apartment? What does it want? Is it just playful, or is it trying to scare me on purpose? Could it hurt me if it wanted to? I don't know if I'll ever have answers. All I know is that something is sharing my space, and it's becoming less interested in hiding. I'm going back to the apartment tomorrow. I don't have a choice, but this time I'm bringing sage, religious symbols from every major faith I could find, and a voice recorder. If that thing is still there, I want to know what I'm dealing with. I just hope I'm not making a terrible mistake. Story 18. And I've been living in this house for almost 25 years now, but I've never once felt like it was truly my home. There's always been something off about this place. It's like the walls themselves don't want us here. I've never shared this story online before, but after what happened yesterday, I just need to get this out somewhere. First, a bit about the house itself. It's a weird structure. The basement was built in the mid-70s, but the upper part is an old house that was moved here from somewhere else. Nobody seems to know exactly how old it is or where it came from. The property sits on what used to be swampland, and there's a power pole right on our property, which my neighbor once mentioned could create some kind of electromagnetic field. I don't know if I believe that, but I'm running out of rational explanations. The strange things started happening almost immediately after we moved in. My mom would constantly see or talk to me when I wasn't actually there. I remember this one incident when I was about 14. I was in my bedroom upstairs reading, and my mom came in looking confused. "Didn't you just come upstairs wearing your blue sweater?" she asked. I wasn't wearing a blue sweater that day. I hadn't even been downstairs for hours, but my mom swore she'd just seen me walk up the stairs wearing different clothes and had even spoken to whatever it was, and it had answered her. Another time, I was sitting in the living room watching TV when my mom came up from the basement looking pale. She told me she'd just spent 5 minutes talking to me through my bedroom door downstairs. She'd thought I was in my room and had been having a whole conversation with someone who responded in my voice. When she came upstairs and found me on the couch, she nearly fainted. It wasn't just my mom experiencing these things. I started hearing my stepdad's voice, calling me to come to different parts of the house. He'd call my name from the hallway, but when I'd go to check, nobody would be there. Sometimes this would happen when he wasn't even home. After the third or fourth time, I started calling back to confirm it was really him before I'd go looking. Then there was the incident with my stepdad that really chilled me. He was napping on the couch one evening when he suddenly jolted awake. I was sitting nearby and saw the whole thing. He stared wide-eyed at the doorway, and I turned to look, but saw nothing. He later told me he'd seen a man standing there who looked directly at him and said, "I'm not afraid of you," before disappearing. My stepdad wasn't the type to make up stories or believe in the paranormal, so seeing him that shaken really scared me. The worst happened 19 years ago. My stepdad had just been diagnosed with cancer that day. He came home from the doctor looking defeated, and while sitting in the kitchen, he suddenly froze. He claimed he saw 2 women in long dresses walk through our kitchen and disappear into the wall. He was so disturbed by this that he refused to stay in the house. He went to the hospital for treatment and never came back home, passing away 3 months later. I've always wondered if what he saw were some kind of harbingers. For years, we would hear the back door open and shut loudly during the night. We'd check every time, but the door would always be locked with no sign anyone had come in or gone out. My mom, who grew up religious but had drifted away from it, finally put a blessed cross on the door out of desperation. The noises stopped after that, which only made me more convinced something supernatural was happening. My great-aunt visited us once about 15 years ago. She was only here for one night. During dinner, she suddenly looked up as if someone had called her name. Later that night, she told my mom that she heard someone whispering her name throughout the house. She left first thing in the morning and refused to ever come back, not even for holiday gatherings. The house also seems to have a strange relationship with water. We've had 2 major basement floodings that the plumbers could never fully explain. Pipes burst in the dead of winter, even though they're well insulated. We've gone through 3 water heaters in 20 years and 4 washing machines. It's like the water itself is trying to escape this place. Then there's the ghost cat. At least 5 different people have seen it. A small dark cat with glowing eyes that darts around corners or appears sitting at the foot of the stairs. We've never owned a cat that looked like that. When we first moved in, we had a calico, but this shadowy cat started appearing even while our real cat was alive, sometimes in the same room. I looked into the history of the house once, trying to make sense of all this. No previous owners stayed very long. The people we bought it from had only lived here for 3 years before divorcing and selling. When we were repainting years ago, we found fist-sized holes in the walls that had been covered with wallpaper. It makes me wonder what kind of anger and negativity lived in this house before us. Yesterday was when things really escalated. I was home alone, which I try to avoid but couldn't help this time. It was around 3 in the afternoon, broad daylight, when all the faucets in the house turned on simultaneously. The kitchen sink, both bathrooms, the utility sink in the basement, all running full blast. I ran from room to room, turning them off, my heart racing. As I turned off the last one in the upstairs bathroom, I heard heavy footsteps coming up the stairs. I froze, knowing I was alone in the house. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, like someone wearing work boots. Thud, thud, thud. They reached the top of the stairs and then stopped. I couldn't move. I could feel someone standing in the hallway just outside the bathroom door, but I couldn't bring myself to look. Then I heard my own voice, exactly as it sounds when I speak, call out from the hallway, "Mom, are you home?" My blood turned to ice. I'm not a mom. I don't have kids. Whatever was out there was trying to trick someone else into responding, using my voice. I somehow found the courage to slam the bathroom door shut and lock it. The minute I did, something slammed against the door so hard the wood splintered around the lock. I screamed and backed up against the shower. The doorknob rattled violently, and then I heard my stepdad's voice, a man who's been dead for 19 years, say clearly through the door, "Let me in, Lillian, I'm not feeling well." I started crying, pressing myself against the far wall. "You're not him," I managed to say. "He's gone." The rattling stopped immediately. The hallway went silent. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, I heard what sounded like bare feet walking away, squishing as if they were wet, leaving damp footprints on the carpet. I didn't come out until my roommate got home an hour later. The hallway carpet was bone dry, but the bathroom mirror had a handprint that was too large to be mine, pressed into the condensation that had somehow formed despite the shower never being turned on. I've tried to rationalize all of this over the years. Maybe the swampy land creates methane that causes hallucinations. Maybe the power pole creates some electromagnetic field that messes with our brains. Maybe the house's strange construction, being two different structures from different times joined together, creates some kind of architectural dissonance. But deep down, I know it's something else. This house has something in it, something that watches us, learns our behaviors, our voices, our relationships, and uses them against us. It seems to feed on negativity, fights, illness, fear. The worse we feel, the stronger it gets. My mom refuses to talk about any of this anymore. She says acknowledging it gives it power, but after yesterday, I don't know how much longer I can stay here. The problem is, I'm afraid of what might follow me if I leave, or worse, what might attach itself to whoever buys this house next. The sun is setting now, and I can hear the pipes in the walls starting to knock and groan. It always gets worse at night. Sometimes I wonder if the house itself isn't the problem. If maybe it's the land underneath, something old and angry that was here long before any structure was built, something that doesn't want to be covered up and forgotten. I just heard my name being called from the basement. I know I'm alone in the house right now. I'm not going to answer it. I never do anymore. Story 19. I'm finally writing this down after all these years. I've always been hesitant to share my experiences because I know how it sounds. Just another teenager making up ghost stories, right? But what happened in my house wasn't made up, and it wasn't just teenage imagination. I'm 17 now, and these things have been happening since I was little. We moved into our house in Cedarwood when I was 4. It's nothing special, just a suburban home built in 1992. No tragic backstory, no ancient burial ground underneath, nothing that would explain what I've experienced. It's just a normal house in a normal neighborhood with abnormal things happening inside it. The basement was always the worst. Even as a little kid, I hated going down there. My parents thought I was just being a scaredy cat, but there was something about that basement that made my skin crawl, especially the crawl space. God, that crawl space. Just thinking about it now makes my heart race. When I was around 8, I was watching TV in the basement by myself. My parents were upstairs cooking dinner, and I was sprawled out on the old couch we kept down there. The crawl space door was across the room, one of those small doors with an old-fashioned round knob. I remember I was watching some cartoon when I heard a clicking sound. At first I ignored it, but then I saw movement from the corner of my eye. The doorknob to the crawl space was turning, slowly, by itself. I froze. My whole body went cold. The knob kept turning until I heard the latch click, and then the door began to swing open. It didn't fly open dramatically like in horror movies. It just slowly opened. There was nothing but darkness inside. The worst part was that I had to run past that open door to get to the stairs. I remember holding my breath, counting to 3 in my head, and then bolting across the room, past the crawl space and up the stairs as fast as my legs could carry me. I didn't look back. I couldn't. My parents didn't believe me, of course. They said the door probably wasn't closed properly and just swung open on its own. But I know what I saw. The knob turned first. Doors don't just do that. Around that same time, I started seeing shadows. Not normal shadows cast by objects or people, shadow figures. They'd appear for just a split second, usually in my peripheral vision, but sometimes right in front of me, most often at the bottom of the basement stairs or reflected in mirrors. There was one incident that still makes me shudder. I was brushing my teeth, looking in the bathroom mirror, when I saw a shadow figure in the reflection. It was in the hallway behind me, moving toward my parents' bedroom. It looked like it was carrying something, though I couldn't make out what. I whipped around, toothbrush still in my mouth, but there was nothing there, just an empty hallway. These shadow sightings were always quick. Blink and miss it moments. They always happened when my family members were elsewhere in the house. I'd check afterward, and sure enough, my mom would be in the kitchen, or my dad would be in his office. It wasn't them casting shadows. Then there were the voices. Sometimes I'd hear someone call my name clear as day when nobody was around. It was usually when I was alone in my room or the bathroom, a soft Alexa, just loud enough to hear. This stopped when I was around 10, and honestly, I was relieved. The voices were somehow worse than the shadows. As I got older, the manifestations changed. Instead of shadows and voices, I'd hear doors slam shut when I knew they hadn't been moved. Heavy footsteps would pace outside my bedroom door late at night when everyone else was asleep. Sometimes there would be loud bangs, like something heavy had fallen, but when I'd check, nothing would be out of place. The frequency of incidents decreased as I grew older, but they never stopped completely, and some were way worse than others. The worst one happened last June. I woke up in the middle of the night and glanced at my phone. It was exactly 3 in the morning. Not 3:01, not 2:59, exactly 3. I only noticed because this had been happening for about a month. I'd randomly wake up at exactly the same time every night. As I was lying there trying to fall back asleep, I heard it, knocking. It came from behind my headboard, which was pushed up against the wall. 3 soft knocks, then silence, then 3 more. I froze, thinking maybe it was the house settling or something outside, but it continued. Knock, 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 pause. Knock, knock, knock. This went on for over 20 minutes. I was too terrified to move. I tried to convince myself it was just the pipes or a branch hitting the house, but it was too rhythmic, too deliberate. The knocking only stopped when I forced myself to think about other things, school, friends, anything else, but the moment my concentration broke, it would start again. Eventually, I worked up the courage to investigate. I turned on all the lights, moved my bed away from the wall, and checked behind the headboard. Nothing. No pipes, no loose wiring, nothing that could explain the knocking. The wall was solid. To see if I could recreate the sound, I gently tapped on the headboard. Immediately, there was a loud smack from the foot of my bed, followed by a whooshing noise like something rushing past me. I didn't sleep for the rest of that night. I left all the lights on and sat in the middle of my bed until morning. The second major incident happened in October. My dad was moving an old cabinet from the garage, and I was waiting for him to help. The garage was cold and dimly lit. While I was standing there, I heard that familiar knocking again, the same pattern as before. 3 knocks, pause, 3 more knocks, but this time it was coming from inside the cabinet. My first instinct was to call for my dad, but something made me hesitate. Instead, I slowly approached the cabinet and opened it. The knocking stopped immediately. There was nothing inside but some old tools and boxes, none of which had moved or fallen. I stepped outside for a minute to get some air and calm down. When I came back into the garage, the knocking had started again. It stopped as soon as my dad arrived, and I never mentioned it to him. I didn't want him to think I was crazy, but the incident that finally confirmed I wasn't imagining things happened in January. My sister was home from college, and we were both in the basement looking for some old board games. The crawl space door, the same one that had terrified me as a child, was completely closed. We were chatting, our backs to the door, when we both heard a click. We turned around at the same time to see the door swinging open. Not fast, not dramatically, just slowly opening, as if someone had turned the knob and pushed it. My sister, who had always been skeptical of my ghost stories, went pale. That door could only be opened by manually turning the handle. There was no draft that could have pushed it open. No way it could have unlatched itself. "Did you see that?" I whispered. She nodded, unable to speak. We both raced upstairs without grabbing the games. Later, she admitted that maybe I hadn't been making things up all these years after all. I've tried to be rational about all this. I believe in ghosts, but I'm not the type to jump to supernatural conclusions without considering other explanations first. I've researched carbon monoxide poisoning, investigated for gas leaks, looked into whether our house could be settling in weird ways, checked for animals in the walls or attic, anything that could explain what I've experienced, but nothing adds up. The knocking follows a pattern too deliberate to be random house noises. The shadows appear and disappear too quickly to be tricks of the light. The crawlspace door physically cannot open unless someone turns the knob. What bothers me most is that our house is so normal. It's not a creaky old Victorian with a dark past. It's just a regular suburban home built in the 90s. There's no reason for it to be haunted. No one died here that we know of. There's no tragic backstory, no unfinished business. Yet something is here with us, something that's been watching me since I was a child, something that knows my name, that follows me from room to room, that waits until I'm alone to make itself known. The incidents have become less frequent as I've gotten older, but they haven't stopped. Just last week, I heard those footsteps again, pacing outside my door at 2 in the morning when everyone else was asleep. I've learned to live with it, in a way. I don't run screaming from the room anymore. I just acknowledge its presence and try to ignore it. But sometimes, like when I'm home alone and hear that familiar knocking, or when I catch a glimpse of a shadow figure from the corner of my eye, the fear comes rushing back. In those moments, I'm 8 years old again, watching the crawlspace door open by itself, knowing that something impossible is happening and being completely powerless to stop it. I'm moving out for college next year. Part of me wonders if whatever is in this house will follow me, or if it's tied to the building itself. I guess I'll find out soon enough. Until then, I keep the lights on at night, and I never, ever go into the basement alone. Story 20. I still can't explain what I saw last Thursday night. It's been 5 days, and I keep replaying it in my head, trying to make sense of it. I've driven down that street hundreds of times, but now I avoid it completely. It was around 9:30 in the evening when my girlfriend Amber and I were heading to our friend Kyle's place for a game night. Nothing special about the evening. Clear sky, normal traffic, just your average Thursday in our quiet suburban neighborhood of Oakwood Heights. We've lived here for 3 years now, and I know every street like the back of my hand. I was driving my Honda Civic, windows rolled up, radio playing some pop song Amber likes. We were talking about normal stuff, work drama, weekend plans, whether we should order pizza or wings at Kyle's, just everyday conversation. We stopped at the intersection of Maple and Brighton, waiting for the light to change. It's a busy four-way with a gas station on one corner and a row of small businesses across the street. I remember drumming my fingers on the steering wheel, not really paying attention to anything specific, when something caught my eye ahead. About a block down Brighton Road where we were headed, several streetlights were dimmed or completely out. It created this weird dark patch, maybe 40 feet long on the right side of the road. It struck me as odd because our neighborhood is usually well maintained. The HOA is pretty strict about these things, and they normally get streetlights fixed within a day or two. Looks like they need to replace those lights, I said to Amber, nodding toward the darkened stretch. She glanced up from her phone. Yeah, it does look pretty dark over there. The light was still red, and I was just staring ahead when I noticed movement in that shadowy area. At first I thought it might be a deer. We get them sometimes in the neighborhood. But as I focused, I could clearly make out a human figure. It was a person crossing from the right side of the road toward the left, moving with this strange, shuffling gait. Not exactly limping, but not walking normally either, sort of sliding across the pavement. I couldn't make out many details because of the darkness, but they were wearing what looked like really baggy pants and this oversized coat, like a trench coat or one of those old dusters. The whole silhouette just looked off somehow. Too bulky in some places, too thin in others. Look at that person crossing the street up there, I said to Amber, pointing. What are they wearing? Looks like some kind of huge coat. Amber leaned forward, squinting through the windshield. Where? I don't see anyone. Right there in the dark spot, crossing from right to left. I kept my finger pointed. The figure had reached the middle of the road by now. She shook her head. I don't see anybody, Marcus. I was about to insist when the figure stopped in the middle of the street. Then, instead of continuing across, they seemed to pivot and started walking directly toward us, not running or anything threatening, just changing direction and heading straight for our car. My stomach did this weird flip. They're coming this way now. You seriously don't see that? Amber leaned even closer to the windshield. Babe, there's literally no one there. Are you messing with me? I wasn't. The figure was now maybe 20 yards ahead, still shrouded in that weird darkness from the burnt-out lights, but definitely moving toward us. I couldn't make out a face, just this dark silhouette with that strange flowing coat. The light turned green. Finally, Amber said, settling back in her seat. I hesitated for a second, then pressed the gas. As we moved forward, I braced myself for our headlights to illuminate this person who was walking straight toward us. They should have been right in front of us any second, but as our car rolled forward and the headlights cut through the darkness of that section of road, there was absolutely nothing there. No person, no movement, just empty street. I slowed down, scanning both sides of the road. The sidewalk on the left had some low-hanging branches from oak trees, but they were completely still. No one was hiding behind them or walking past them. The right side had a small strip of grass between the sidewalk and road, completely empty. There were no alleys, no driveways, nowhere this person could have ducked into in the 2 or 3 seconds between when I last saw them and when our headlights swept the area. What the hell? I muttered, my hands gripping the steering wheel tighter. What's wrong? Amber asked, looking concerned now. That person, they were right here, walking toward us, and now they're just gone. Marcus, I swear there was nobody there. Maybe it was a shadow from a tree or something. No, it was definitely a person. I saw them cross half the street, then turn and walk this way. I was still driving slowly, checking each yard and driveway we passed. They were wearing this weird coat, like a trench coat or something, and baggy pants. Amber put her hand on my arm. Babe, you're freaking me out. There was no one there. Look around. Where could they have gone that fast? It's an open street. She was right. That's what made it so unsettling. The person I saw should have been caught in our headlights, but it was like they had just melted into the pavement, disappeared into thin air. I sped up, wanting to get past the darkened stretch of road. My heart was racing, and I felt cold sweat forming on my back. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the figure standing in the middle of the road behind us. But there was nothing. Maybe I'm just tired, I said, more to convince myself than Amber. Been working too many late shifts this week. Amber seemed relieved by this explanation. Yeah. You've been pulling doubles at the warehouse. Your eyes are probably playing tricks on you. But I knew what I saw, or at least I thought I did. The image was so clear in my mind, that shuffling figure with the oversized coat, moving across the street and then turning toward us. How could I have imagined something so specific? We arrived at Kyle's house about 5 minutes later. The whole drive, I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. I kept replaying it in my head, trying to figure out if there was any logical explanation. Maybe the person had quickly ducked behind a car I hadn't noticed. But no, there weren't any parked cars in that section. Maybe they'd sprinted away faster than I could track, but the movement I'd seen was slow, deliberate, not someone capable of suddenly breaking into an Olympic dash. Throughout the game night, I found myself zoning out, thinking about that figure. I kept it to myself, didn't want everyone thinking I was losing it. We played Catan and some card games, ordered pizza, had a few beers, normal stuff, but I couldn't shake the uneasiness. On the drive home, I purposely took a different route, even though it added 10 minutes to our trip. Amber noticed but didn't say anything until we were almost home. You're still freaked out about that shadow person, aren't you? She asked quietly. I nodded. I know it sounds crazy, but I swear I saw someone, Amber, and they just disappeared. Maybe it was just the way the shadows were falling from the trees. With those lights out, it could have created some weird patterns. Maybe, I said, but I didn't believe it. Trees don't create shadows that move across streets, change direction, and walk toward you. That night, I had trouble sleeping. I kept seeing that figure in my mind, the strange gait, the oversized coat, the way it moved with purpose directly toward our car, and then simply vanished. The next morning, I drove back to that stretch of Brighton Road alone. It was daytime and all the streetlights were off, of course. I parked nearby and walked up and down that section of road, looking for anything that might explain what I'd seen. A mannequin someone had left out as a prank? Some kind of reflective surface that could have created an illusion? But there was nothing unusual, just a normal suburban street with houses, trees, and sidewalks. I even knocked on a couple of doors, asking if anyone else had seen anything strange in the neighborhood lately. Most people looked at me like I was crazy. One old guy said his dog sometimes barks at nothing in that area, but dogs do that all the time. I've been doing research online since then, looking up things like shadow people and figures that disappear. There are so many stories out there that sound similar to what I experienced. People seeing dark figures that move in ways that don't seem quite human, appearing and disappearing without explanation. Some theories say they're interdimensional beings. Others say they're manifestations of our subconscious. Some people think they're paranormal entities or even aliens. I've never believed in any of that stuff. I'm a practical person. I work in logistics, for God's sake. My job is organizing and tracking things in the real world. But now I don't know what to think. What keeps bothering me most is that Amber didn't see anything. If we both saw it, maybe I could convince myself it was some kind of shared hallucination or a real person who found some way to disappear quickly. But the fact that only I saw it makes me question my own perception of reality. I haven't driven down that stretch of Brighton Road since that night. I take detours to avoid it. Amber thinks I'm being ridiculous, but she doesn't push it. Last night, she suggested I might want to talk to someone professional about it, which honestly just made me feel worse. I'm not having a mental breakdown. I saw something real, something I can't explain. Sometimes I wonder if I'll see that figure again. Part of me hopes I do, just so I can confirm I'm not going crazy. But a bigger part of me is terrified of what it might mean if I do see it again. I check the local news every day, looking for reports of strange sightings or incidents in our neighborhood. Nothing so far. I've started carrying my phone ready to record when I'm driving at night, just in case. The thing is, whatever I saw wasn't threatening. It didn't feel malevolent or scary in the moment. It was just there, and then it wasn't. It's the impossibility of it that keeps me up at night. People don't just vanish into thin air. They can't. But this one did. So that's my story. I don't expect anyone to believe me. Hell, I'm not sure I would believe it if someone else told me. But I know what I saw, and I can't explain it. I just hope I never see it again. Or maybe I do. I don't even know anymore. Story 21. I still can't explain what happened that night in the mountains. It's been 3 months, and I get chills just thinking about it. I've tried to rationalize it, but I can't. My name's Victoria. Back in January, I planned a weekend getaway with 5 friends to the Appalachian Mountains. We found this cabin near Seven Devils, North Carolina, through an online rental service. It looked perfect in the pictures. Spacious living room with a stone fireplace, panoramic windows overlooking the valley, 3 bedrooms that could fit all 6 of us. The price was reasonable too, especially split between us. We were all excited about snow tubing and just disconnecting from work for a while. When we started the drive up the mountain, I immediately felt uneasy. The rental description hadn't mentioned how remote this place truly was. The single-lane road twisted up the mountainside with a sheer drop on one side and no guardrail. Our SUV struggled with some of the steeper sections, tires slipping on patches of ice. Jess, who was driving, kept joking about how we'd be screwed if we needed to leave in a hurry, but nobody laughed. It took almost 40 minutes of careful driving from the main road to reach the cabin. When we finally pulled up, I noticed these weird wooden carvings along the path to the front door. Tree faces, I guess you'd call them. Someone had carved faces into sections of logs and mounted them on posts. They weren't cute or whimsical like garden gnomes. They looked angry. Their hollow eyes seemed to follow us as we unloaded the car. "Who puts creepy shit like this around their rental property?" Mike asked, poking one of the faces. "Local art," Ryan suggested with a shrug, but I could tell he found them unsettling too. The cabin itself was beautiful though, rustic but modern inside with that gorgeous view I mentioned. You could see for miles across the valley and to the mountains beyond. It was breathtaking during daylight, but as the sun set, the vast darkness outside the windows made me feel like we were being watched. We spent that first day settling in, cooking dinner together, and planning our snow tubing adventure for the next day. The resort was only about 20 minutes away, down that treacherous road again. We found a deck of cards and some board games in a cabinet, and after dinner, we played and drank wine late into the night. By 1 in the morning, we were all pretty tired. The altitude and the wine had gotten to us. We decided to turn in since we wanted to hit the slopes early the next day. I shared a room with my friend Amber. The bedroom was cozy, with pine walls and a small window overlooking the woods behind the cabin. I fell asleep almost immediately. I woke up around 4 in the morning, drenched in sweat. The room felt suffocatingly hot, which was weird because the cabin had been chilly when we went to bed. I sat up, trying to orient myself. Amber was still asleep, snoring lightly. I had this overwhelming sense that something was wrong. Not just the temperature, something else, a feeling of intrusion. I needed to use the bathroom anyway, so I got up. The cabin was dark except for a few small night lights plugged into outlets in the hallway. I used the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face, trying to shake off the weird feeling of dread that had settled over me. As I stepped back into the hallway, I noticed a draft. It was suddenly freezing cold, much colder than it should have been, even with the winter temperature outside. That's when I saw it. The front door was standing wide open, not just unlocked, but fully open, with the frigid mountain air pouring in. My first thought was that one of my friends had gone outside to smoke or something, but it was 4 in the morning and everyone had been pretty drunk before bed. Plus it was freezing outside, maybe 20 degrees. I walked to the doorway and looked out. The motion-activated porch light hadn't turned on, which meant no one had walked out recently. "Hello?" I called softly, not wanting to wake everyone up if someone was just outside. No response, just darkness and the sound of wind whipping through the trees. I figured someone must have failed to close it properly before we all went to bed, and the wind had blown it open. We'd been pretty tipsy after all, so I grabbed the door and pulled it shut, making sure to turn the deadbolt. I even tugged on the handle afterward to make absolutely sure it was locked. It was secure. I turned to head back to my room, still feeling uneasy but telling myself I was being silly. I'd taken maybe 3 steps when I heard it. The distinct sound of the door handle rattling. I froze mid-step, my heart suddenly pounding in my chest. I turned around slowly, hoping I'd imagined it. I hadn't. As I watched, the deadbolt that I had just locked turned by itself with a solid click. Then the handle turned downward and the door began to swing open. Slowly, deliberately. There was no rush to it, no force like the wind had caught it. It opened as if someone was carefully pushing it. I stood there, paralyzed. The door had a large window in the top half, and I could clearly see that there was nobody on the other side, no hand on the handle, nothing visible on the walkway, just darkness. The door stopped when it was fully open, and the cold air rushed in again. I couldn't move, I couldn't scream. I just stood there, staring at the open doorway, trying to process what I'd just seen. After what felt like forever but was probably only seconds, I managed to snap out of it. My first instinct was to wake everyone up, but I felt stupid. What would I say? The door opened by itself. They'd think I was drunk or dreaming, so I gathered whatever courage I had left and walked back to the door. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grasp the handle. I pulled it shut again and turned the deadbolt, this time with more force than necessary. Then I backed away, keeping my eyes fixed on the door, waiting to see if it would happen again. It didn't. The door stayed closed, but I couldn't bring myself to go back to bed. Instead, I went to the living room and sat on the couch where I could see the front door. I turned on a small lamp and just sat there watching, listening to every creak and groan of the cabin settling. I must have sat there for 2 hours until the first hints of dawn started to lighten the sky. Only then did I feel safe enough to go back to my room. I didn't sleep though. I just lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to come up with logical explanations for what I'd seen. When Amber's alarm went off at 7, I pretended I'd just woken up too. I didn't mention what happened. We all had breakfast together, excited about our day of snow tubing. I almost convinced myself I'd imagined the whole door incident or that it had been some weird half-dream. The day went fine. The snow tubing was fun, and being out in the sunlight with people around made the previous night seem less scary. We stayed at the resort until late afternoon, had dinner at a restaurant in town, and then headed back to the cabin. As we packed up to leave the next morning, that's when the knocking started. We were all in different rooms, gathering our belongings, when I first heard it. 2 distinct knocks, then a pause, then 2 more. Deep, hollow sounds, like someone rapping their knuckles on wood, but much louder. "Did someone hear that?" I called out. Ryan poked his head out from his room. "The knocking?" "Yeah, weird." We all stopped what we were doing to listen. 2 knocks. Pause. 2 knocks. It was coming from outside, from the woods surrounding the cabin, probably just trees hitting each other in the wind, Mike suggested. But there wasn't much wind that morning, just enough to gently sway the branches. "Maybe woodpeckers," Jess offered, but the rhythm was too regular, too deliberate, and the sound was too deep and resonant for a bird. I walked to the window and looked out at the tree line. Nothing moved except the gently swaying branches. The knocking continued, always in that same pattern. 2 knocks. Pause. 2 knocks. After about 5 minutes, it stopped as suddenly as it had started. We laughed it off, finished packing, and left. No one else seemed particularly bothered by it, but combined with what happened with the door, it left me deeply unsettled. I've experienced what people might call paranormal activity before. When I was a kid, I lived in a house where lights would turn on by themselves, and we'd hear footsteps when no one was there. But this was different. This was physical. A door unlocking and opening without anyone touching it. And those knocks. They felt intentional, like something was trying to communicate. What scared me most was how isolated we were up there. That single treacherous road was our only way down the mountain. The cabin was perched near the edge of a steep drop. If something or someone had actually entered through that door, where would we have gone? How would we have escaped? I've read about wind patterns and pressure changes that can make doors open or close in houses. I've looked up every possible explanation for what I experienced. Maybe the lock was faulty. Maybe the door frame was warped. Maybe the knocking was some natural phenomenon I'm not familiar with. But deep down, I know what I saw. That deadbolt turned by itself. That door opened slowly, deliberately, as if an invisible hand was pushing it. And whatever was knocking in those woods wasn't just trees in the wind. I haven't told my friends how scared I really was that night. They'd probably laugh it off, but I know I'll never rent a remote cabin again, especially not one with only one way out and weird carved faces guarding the path. Some places just don't want visitors, I guess. Or maybe they want visitors of a different kind.